Chapter 280. Sure, go ahead. You can have as many servings as you want, as long as you can. Lulu nodded with a smile. He reached out to wipe away the tears on her face with a doting look in his eyes. But if I keep eating, won't I become very fat? Won't you abandon me then? 1111 asked as she looked at Lulu worriedly. Lulu patted 1111's head with a smile, and said, "Silly girl, you lived in my heart when you were so skinny. Now that you're fat, you'll be stuck in my heart and won't be able to leave. Hehe, Lulu, you're so nice." 1111 immediately broke into laughter. A blissful smile appeared on her face. "Ah, I'm so envious of this kind of love. If a man said that to me, I'd definitely marry him." A chubby girl at a nearby table cupped her face in her hands with an envious expression. "Then you'll have to move into his heart first. Otherwise, you'll be stuck outside," her mother, who was sitting across from her, said calmly as she glanced at her. "Mom, if you talk like that, I'll lose my temper." The girl was instantly dejected as she looked at her mother with puffed cheeks. "If you're angry, then so be it. If you can't finish it, you can give me this tofu pudding. Your father has been saying that my skin has become more tender and beautiful these days." The woman wasn't flustered at all as she looked at the sweet tofu pudding in front of the girl. "No. I want to eat some delicious sweet tofu pudding to calm my sorrowful heart." The girl hurriedly reached out to protect her tofu pudding. Then, she picked up her spoon and began to eat with a serious expression. The more she ate, the happier she became. "Big Bear, you liar. Your heart is so small. How can Big Sister 1111 live in it?" Amy looked at Lulu with a righteous expression. Lulu looked at Amy, who had a serious expression on her face, and didn't know how to explain herself. "Sister 1111, I heard from the aunties that men who lie are unreliable. Bear looks honest, but he's lying to you." Amy then looked at 1111 and said earnestly, "Also, Sister 1111 looks the best right now. If you put on weight, you won't look so good anymore. A woman shouldn't trust a man. You have to be the best you can to ensure that you can still live well without a man. Only then will a man know how to cherish you." This is what the aunties said. When the guests heard Amy admonishing the young lady like a little adult, they all smiled kindly. At the same time, they expressed their approval of Amy's behavior. After all, this young couple was always showing off their love for each other. Although it was sweet, but, watching them from the sidelines felt a little uncomfortable. They wanted to say something, but they didn't know what to say. Amy's words made everyone say what they wanted to say quickly. She said it in the tone of a child, and while expressing their opinions, it didn't have any negative impact on the lovey-dovey couple. "That's right. You shouldn't eat too much and get too fat. Otherwise, you won't be able to wear beautiful dresses in the future." 1111 still had a smile on her face, but she also nodded. She reached out to touch Amy's hair and said with a smile, "Little Amy knows so much. I heard it from the aunties." Amy nodded happily and said with a happy smile on her face, "Well, you have to believe the words of the aunties." 1111 nodded. She looked up at Lulu and said, "Lulu, you have to treat me better in the future. Don't change. Well, you are my everything in this world." Lulu nodded seriously with a sincere expression. "Big Bear, you've changed." Amy looked up at Lulu and pointed at the bamboo box at his feet. "Look, you still have this box. I saw you carry it in." Lulu opened his mouth. He glanced at the box at his feet and didn't know what to say. "Well, it tastes better now." The customers nodded with satisfaction and enjoyed the food even more. "Ha ha ha." 1111 was convulsing with laughter. She seemed to be in a good mood. "Hee hee." An honest smile appeared on Lulu's face at the sight of 1111's joyful expression. He scratched his head and sat down again. He didn't dare to say anything else, but as long as 1111 was happy, nothing else mattered. These two are interesting people. But Tree of World sounds a little familiar. Could it be that these two are druids? Mag thought to himself as he turned to look at Lulu and 1111 with an intrigued expression. Meg didn't have any memories about druids in Alex's memory. However, Meg got a tattered history of the Norland continent from a bookstore in the Aden Square a few days ago. He didn't know who wrote it, but the bookstore owner said it was a relic from almost 100 years ago. After some bargaining, he bought it for 1 gold coin. He read it like a storybook when he was free these days, and had a rough understanding of the chaotic Norland continent. The history was very rough, and only a few words about druids were mentioned. The general idea was that druids were a branch of the elven race, but they called themselves night elves. They didn't regard the wind forest as their holy land, nor did they believe in the tree of life. Instead, they had their own holy tree, the Tree of World. During the extremely chaotic racial war 100 years ago, the druids were powerful, but their holy land was breached in the end. The Tree of World, which was thousands of meters tall, was toppled, and the druids were wiped out. There were no more druids in the world. Countless races on the Norland continent had been wiped out during the war, and the druids were only one of them. Although the record was simple, the author speculated that the elves were behind the destruction of the druids. After all, druids had always been regarded as heretics by the elves. Of course, Meg didn't know the exact reason, but if these two were really druids who had survived 100 years ago, then they were a rare race. They were probably the only druids left on the Norland continent. Yarbemia placed the bowls of rice and braised chicken on the table, and asked, "Here are your 4 bowls of rice and 1 braised chicken. Do you want the rest of the dishes to be served later or now?" Lulu looked at 1111, who was about to dig in with a bowl of rice, and said with a smile, "Let's wait until we're done eating." "Okay." Yarbemia nodded, and walked to the next customer. "Take your time, big sister 1111. Amy smiled, and walked to the next customer with Ugly Duckling in her arms. When she was busy, Amy would help Sally with the bill to share some of her work. Chapter 281. The warmth nourished the world tree in her body. 1111 could clearly feel the connection that had been severed for 30 years being re-established. Even though it was very weak and fragile, as if it would die in an instant, it was as if a little life was being reborn in her body. It reminded her of the child in her womb all those years ago, and she felt a trace of happiness in her heart. The world tree had been born in her body all those years ago. It had accompanied her for decades like a child. Later on, when she was severely injured and on the verge of death, it was the world tree that had taken the initiative to transfer all of its source of life into her body and saved her life. Now, this child had come back to life. To her, this was a very special feeling. The gap in the depths of her heart was also slowly healing as the world tree recovered. Lulu sat across from her and watched quietly. She picked up her chopsticks and put food in 1111's bowl from time to time. When she finished eating, she would give her a bowl of rice. However, she didn't eat anything herself. "Lulu, you should eat too. There's a lot of rice anyway," 1111 said to Lulu with her mouth full. "It's okay. You eat first. I'm not hungry. Eat more. It's good for your body." Lulu shook her head with a smile. She looked toward the kitchen and watched Meg's busy figure. She sighed with emotion. This owner is really amazing. He can make such a delicious dish with such miraculous effects. If the world tree can grow by eating braised chicken and rice, then when we have children in the future, we can bring them here to eat braised chicken and rice every day. Their cultivation and growth speed will definitely increase a lot. Yeah, it's so delicious. And I feel warm all over after eating it. It's super comfortable. I think I can eat 10 more bowls. 1111 swallowed the rice in her mouth and said happily. Then, she lowered her head and continued to eat happily. Lulu looked at the smile on 1111's face. She turned around and looked out of the restaurant with vigilance and worry. Those guys. She didn't know when they would show up. Burp, Robert and Luther burped at the same time. They looked at the bowl in front of them, which looked as if it had been licked clean. Then, they looked up at each other with an awkward expression. "My lord, this sweet tofu pudding is so delicious. It's on the same level as Ruggiamo. I think these 2 dishes can be ranked first and second on the list. I can't stop eating them. 200 copper coins, 300 copper coins, it's so worth it." All the guesses and suspicions he had before entering the restaurant had already been tossed to the back of his mind. However, his expression was somewhat awkward. After all, It took courage to slap yourself in the face. However, as a man of integrity, after tasting the delicious Rugiamo and tofu pudding, Luther couldn't go against his conscience and say that they weren't delicious. That was even more disgusting than slapping himself in the face. Robert shook his head and said, "I agree with your evaluation of Rugiamo. However, I think the savory tofu pudding and braised chicken and rice are more suitable. Tofu pudding is such a delicate and soft delicacy, so of course it has to be savory. My lord, that's because you haven't tasted this sweet tofu pudding before. If this tofu pudding was salty, I don't dare to imagine what kind of strange taste it would have." Luther didn't back down in the slightest this time. Instead, he argued with reason. "You're wrong to say that. The tofu pudding itself has the fragrance and sweetness of soybeans. With the refreshing sauce, the chopped pickled mustard greens, and the tiny prawns, it's delicious. It's an absolute delicacy." Robert shook his head. However, he was a leader, after all, and naturally couldn't argue with Luther in the restaurant. He raised his hand with a smile and said, "All right, you eat your sweet tofu pudding, and I'll eat my savory tofu pudding. Don't argue in the restaurant." Luther wasn't someone who didn't know when to back down, and he immediately backed down after hearing Robert's words. However, it appeared that he still wasn't going to back down just because of Robert's status. "Waiter, the bill for two," Robert said. "That's 1 braised chicken and rice, 2 tofu pudding, and 1 Rugiamo. That's a total of 1,550 copper coins." Amy made her way over with Ugly Duckling in her arms. She counted the bowls on the table and extended her little hand toward Robert in a baby voice. "All right." Robert looked at Amy with a hint of surprise in his eyes. He pulled out a dragon coin, 5 gold coins, and 5 coins from his wallet, and placed them in her little hand. He didn't think that not only did this little girl know how to eat, but she was also very good at math at such a young age. She was able to calculate the price in such a short time. Even the average adult wouldn't be as fast as her. "Millimeter HM." Amy nodded. She put Ugly Duckling down on the ground and walked over to the counter with the money in her hands. 10 coins was a lot for her. Just as Robert was about to stand up, he flipped through the menu beside him. He suddenly discovered that there were many words written on the back of the menu, and an intrigued look appeared on his face. There were a series of rules listed on the back of the menu. 1. Loud noises are strictly prohibited in the restaurant. 2. Cash is strictly prohibited in the restaurant. Credit is strictly prohibited. 3. Fighting and threatening the owner and employees are strictly prohibited in the restaurant. Violators of this rule will be blacklisted and banned from the restaurant forever. All of the rules were written on the back of the menu in gilded handwriting, and his eyes lit up at the sight of them. It wasn't rare for restaurants to have rules, but most of the restaurants in the Aden Square had rules that prohibited certain races from entering or taking out alcohol. This was the first time that Robert had seen a restaurant like Amy's that had such strict rules for its customers. A restaurant owner who dares to use half-race waitresses, a restaurant that dares to set its own requirements for its customers, and a chef who can cook extremely tasteless food that has body conditioning effects. A restaurant like this should rank at the top of the Aden Square food competition rankings. Robert put down the menu in his hand and looked at Meg, who was busy in the kitchen. He stood up and walked out of the door. After exiting the restaurant, he stopped and turned back to look at Amy's with a faint smile on his face, and said, "Luther, wouldn't it be very interesting if a restaurant that doesn't belong to the Aden Chamber of Commerce one day occupies the top 5 spots on the Aden Square food competition rankings?" Luther also looked at Amy's signboard with a serious expression, and said, "If such delicious food can't even rank in the top 5, then I feel like our Aden Square food competition rankings have lost all credibility." That's right. The most important thing for customers to choose a restaurant based on the Aden Square food competition rankings is credibility, and we're losing that right now. Robert nodded with a serious expression. He withdrew his gaze from the restaurant, and a faint smile appeared on his face as he said, "But things are different now. Amy's has appeared out of nowhere, and perhaps it's a way to break the impasse. Customers have sharp eyes, and if angry customers vote with their feet, perhaps the association will have to undergo a new round of reforms. A war with the Aden Chamber of Commerce might be a sharp knife." Chapter 282. After finishing 2 servings of braised chicken and rice and 6 bowls of rice, 1111 placed the earthenware bowls she had licked clean on the table and burped contentedly. She rubbed her round belly and leaned her head back in her chair. She looked at Lulu and smiled happily. "This is so good, Lulu. This is the first time in my life that I've eaten something so delicious. It's the first time I've had such a good meal." The guests at the table who were about to leave looked at the pile of bowls in front of 1111 with a strange expression. This girl looked small and thin, but she was also a big eater. How could she eat so much by herself? "Then we'll come again." Lulu nodded with a smile. She looked very happy too. "But you haven't eaten yet." 1111 suddenly thought of something. She said to Yarbemia, who had just walked up to her, "Can you bring the rest of the dishes to us?" "Sure, please wait a moment." Yarbemia nodded with a smile. He put away the bowls on the table and walked to the kitchen. Although he was also surprised by 1111's appetite, he didn't show it on his face. Instead, he was a little envious of such a spoiled love. It was so reassuring. The rest of the Yangju fried rice, rujiamo, and 2 servings of sweet tofu pudding were soon served. The tantalizing aroma wafted over. 1111 looked at the new dishes on the table, and her eyes gradually lit up. However, she was so full that even moving her body was a burden. She pouted and said pitifully, "Lulu, I want to have a bite of that rainbow-colored rice." "Okay, then have a bite." Lulu scooped up a spoonful of rice and put it into her mouth. "Oh, it's delicious," and 1111's words stopped abruptly. She was a little incredulous, and a little wary. She chewed a few times, and enjoyed the faint fragrance that seeped out from the rice. It tasted a little similar to the spring of life that she had drunk many years ago. After swallowing, her body felt slightly nourished. Although the effect wasn't very obvious, it was very similar to the feeling brought about by the spring of life. In other words, when the owner made this dish, it was very likely that he added a little bit of the spring of life. However, the spring of life was the holy spring of the elven race. Even among the elven race, only the royal family and the noblest families had access to it. How did he get it? Could it be that he was related to the elves? "What's wrong?" Lou immediately noticed the change in 1111's expression and asked. "Nothing. It's too good. But I'm really full. You can finish it all." A smile reappeared on 1111's face as she shook her head. However, her gaze soon fell on the bowl of sweet tofu pudding, and an eager expression appeared on her face. She picked up her spoon and said, "But I think I can finish this sweet tofu pudding. Eat slowly. Don't overeat," Lulu said with a smile. He picked up his spoon and began to eat the Yangju fried rice. It tasted different from the braised chicken, but it was just as delicious. After watching 1111 eat for a long time, his stomach was growling with hunger, and he couldn't stop eating. The sweet tofu pudding is super delicious. 1111 scooped up a spoonful of the tofu pudding, and her eyes lit up. Although she was full, she sat up straight again and began to focus on the tofu pudding in front of her. It was the busiest time for the restaurant. One customer after another placed their orders and left after paying the bill. When they walked out, they all had joyful smiles on their faces and tickets in their hands. Apart from the sweet and savory fans who gave 1 star to each other, the rest of the customers all gave 5 stars. Robert and Luther returned to the vote-counting booth. The Catering Association staff members who were responsible for counting the votes had also just returned from the restaurant across the street. They were about to continue counting the votes. "Vice President, Luther, you're back. Did that restaurant hire a lot of people to fake the results?" "We had the Drew's roast lamb chop, which is ranked 68th on the rankings this afternoon," Alvin hurriedly asked as he looked at the 2 people walking over. "Yeah, if the vice president can verify this, then we can remove this restaurant from the rankings." Everyone was also looking forward to the results. Although they knew that the Aiden Square food competition wasn't fair, they couldn't tolerate a restaurant that disregarded the rules and disrupted the order. 1 rujiamo and 1 sweet tofu pudding, both 5 stars. Luther waved the tickets that the elven waitress had given him before they left and handed them to Alvin. "Huh." Alvin faltered slightly at the sight of the tickets in his hand. Holy fuck, Luther, you weren't bought off by that restaurant owner, were you? You're completely wrong. Luther shook his head. He wasn't angry at all. Instead, he turned to Robert, who still hadn't said anything. 1 braised chicken and rice, 1 savory tofu pudding, both 5 stars. Robert handed over the tickets in his hand. Huh. Everyone's expressions changed in unison. If Luther had been bought off, they would have been a little skeptical. However, no one would believe that Vice President Robert had been bought off. He was the vice president of the Catering Association, yet he had been stripped of all his power and authority. He had even personally come here to check the tickets and inspect the restaurants that might have had problems. All of this was because he couldn't stand the current state of the Catering Association. He couldn't be bought over. As members of the Catering Association, they were naturally well aware of this. However, Robert's current attitude had already explained everything. There were no issues with the tickets for this restaurant, and the 5-star reviews for both dishes were simply inconceivable to the strict Robert. Luther and I have already visited that restaurant. Business is booming, and there's no obvious reason for this. At the same time, we've ordered and tasted the dishes in person. The dishes are completely different from those of other restaurants. They're subversive, comfortable, and excellent service, all of which are worthy of a 5-star review. Furthermore, customers have high spending power, so they're more willing to accept this price, so there are no issues with the tickets at all. Robert looked at everyone with a serious expression. Seeing as the vice president has said that, it looks like this restaurant really is a dark horse in this Aden Square food competition. A worker nodded with a smile. He was also quite expectant as he asked, but I'm a little curious. Just what kind of food is it that the vice president gave a 5-star review for? It's naturally very delicious. It can't be described with words. If you have time, go and try it yourself. I highly recommend the sweet tofu pudding, Luther said with a sincere expression. I think the savory tofu pudding is more delicious, Robert said before turning to leave. My God, what did I just hear? Vice President Robert, who has always been an upright and honest man, recommended the savory tofu pudding, a young worker exclaimed after a brief silence. Everyone looked at Robert's departing figure with incredulity on their faces. This was something that had never happened before. 6 men dressed as hunters were leading their horses as they scanned their surroundings with alert expressions, as if they were looking for something. Auntie, where can I find the best food in the Aden Square? The youngest hunter among them asked as he stopped a woman who appeared to be in her 30s. You're the auntie. Your whole family is auntie. I'm still a virgin. The woman rolled her eyes with a disdainful expression. She turned around and stomped on the young hunter's foot before storming off in a huff. That bitch. The young hunter raised his arm to reveal the arrow in his sleeve, which he aimed at the woman's back. Chapter 283. Are you full? Lulu put down the spoon in his hand. The food in front of him was already gone, and he smiled at 1111, who was licking her bowl of tofu pudding. I'm so full. I'm super satisfied, 1111 said happily as she put down the bowl with a trace of orange syrup hanging from the corner of her mouth. Lulu reached out to wipe the syrup from the corner of her mouth. Wait. 1111 suddenly reached out to stop him. She licked the syrup from the corner of her mouth, and said with a smug expression, Lulu, you're not allowed to eat my syrup. If you like it, I'll order 2 servings for you next time. Lulu withdrew his hand with a smile. That won't do. We have to follow the boss's rules. Each person can only order 1 serving, which means that each person can only eat 1 serving. How can I be the only one eating 2 servings? We can't be blacklisted. 1111 shook her head with a serious expression. We have to follow the rules. A serious expression also appeared on Lulu's face. The braised chicken, which could resurrect the world tree, was like a ray of light in the darkness to them. It reignited their faith and hope, so they were also very respectful toward Meg, who had cooked up such a delicious dish. Here's the bill, Lulu said. Big Bear, the total is 25 gold coins. Amy walked over and thought for a moment before extending her hands toward Lulu. Wow, Little Amy is so smart. She calculated it so quickly. If it were me, it would take me a long time to calculate it. 1111 looked at Amy with admiration. Not only was this little girl adorable, she was also very interesting, and super smart. She was a very likable child. Father taught me all of this. Amy looked at 1111 proudly. She then looked at 1111 curiously, and asked, "Big sister 1111, are you coming back tonight?" "Of course, but I ate so much for lunch, so I'll probably come back later tonight to try all of the delicious food." 1111 nodded with a sincere and serious expression. "Okay." Amy nodded happily. Even though it was her first time meeting 1111, she felt that this big sister was very kind and good at eating. She was able to finish 2 servings of braised chicken, 6 bowls of rice, and a sweet tofu pudding all by herself. Amy was very impressed. 25 gold coins. Lulu carefully placed 25 gold coins in Amy's hands, and they formed a small mountain. Even though she had been scolded by Amy many times today, she still looked at Amy with a kind smile on her face. Because of this little girl and the boss, 1111 was smiling a lot more today, and she even gave them hope. "Goodbye, little Amy, and ugly duckling." 1111 patted Amy's head, and then pinched ugly duckling's face. "Goodbye, big sister 1111, Amy also said politely as she watched the two of them walk out the door. Druids are very close to nature, so they're more approachable to children and animals. Meg wondered to himself as he watched the two of them walk out hand in hand. He was quite interested in this pair of druids, who were very likely to be the last surviving druids. "Lulu, what are these tickets for?" 1111 asked Lulu as she looked at the 2 tickets in her hand. "That elf said they're for voting." Lulu turned his head to look at Sally, who was busy settling the bill for the customers in the restaurant, and a hint of hostility appeared in his eyes. She's still a child, so she probably doesn't know what happened back then. Besides, she's a very powerful magic caster, so we might not be able to defeat her. 1111 shook her head slightly as she held Lulu's hand. Then, she walked forward while holding his hand, and said softly, "But I'm afraid this boss is very close to the elves. He has a half-elf daughter, which means the mother of the child is an elf. And I tasted the spring of life in the Yangju fried rice." "Spring of life?" Lulu's expression changed slightly upon hearing that. 1111 nodded. "Yes. We bought a portion of the spring of life 25 years ago. I still remember the taste. I'm 100% sure that's the taste of the spring of life. In that case, we have to be careful with what we say in the future. It's been over 100 years, and people should have forgotten that there used to be a race called Druids on the Norland continent. But now, the elves are so powerful, and those vicious dogs are chasing after us. If our identities are exposed, I'm afraid we'll have to leave Chaos City again." Lulu's expression became very serious. They had just seen the light of hope. How could they be willing to leave just like that? 1111 suddenly reached out to hold Lulu's hand, and looked at the center of the Aiden Square. "Then let's not go to vote. I have a bad feeling about this." Lulu nodded. "Okay, then we won't go." She looked around, and then held 1111's hand, and walked straight to the center of the square. "Lulu, I don't think that owner is a bad person. A bad person wouldn't be able to raise such a cute and sensible child." "Yes, but we still have to be careful. The owner must be powerful to be able to make a high-tier elven magic caster work as a waitress in his restaurant." "That's right, but if you can eat and drink for free, no one can resist the temptation of such delicious food, right? Maybe she's just here for the food. A high-tier magic caster working as a waitress in a restaurant just for food? Yes. She's a pretty little girl. If she can eat good food with her own ability, why would she go around doing mercenary missions like a man? Look at how elegant and noble she is working as a waitress. She's not demeaning at all." The two of them walked further and further into the Aiden Square. Under the cover of all the statues and trees, no one noticed them. "Boss, there are so many restaurants here. Which one should we start looking for?" Most of the 6 hunters were standing in front of a few rows of magic screens. They looked up at the densely packed names of the restaurants with troubled expressions on their faces. If this is a ranking, Then we should start looking from the first restaurant. The bearded man pointed to the first dish on the first magic screen, Duca's Restaurant's roast lamb. Boss, you're so wise. They must be looking for restaurants based on this ranking. As long as we look from restaurant to restaurant, we'll definitely find them. Everyone chimed in. Chapter 284. Which direction do you smell, Blackie? Anthem looked at the middle-aged hunter and asked excitedly. The other hunters also looked at him expectantly. Here, here, and here, all of them. The hunter called Hazy pointed to the left, then to the right, and finally to the inside of the square, and said seriously, "Nonsense, then you might as well say that they are in the sky." Anthem slapped him on the head, somewhat annoyed. "Boss, they're everywhere. According to the residual smell, it shouldn't have been here for too long. That means they're probably still around," Blackie said, feeling aggrieved. Anthem nodded, and said, "That's right. One of you will memorize this list, and we'll search for them one by one." This. Everyone's face suddenly revealed a difficult expression. Asking them to remember these things was simply too difficult. "Boss, this seems to be the top 100 restaurants on the list. It's the same order as the one above. We can follow this order and search for them one by one. I think it's very likely that they also eat according to this order." At this time, the youngest hunter took out a piece of golden red paper from the ballot box beside him. On it was a list of restaurants, and the addresses were marked in detail at the back. "All right, then we'll search according to this list. Keep your eyes open." Anthem nodded. He waved his hand, and walked toward the first Duca's restaurant. "Captain, those guys look a little suspicious," Monkey whispered to Basil as he watched the hunters walking quickly with their horses. "Yes. That guy wanted to kill a woman." Basil's expression was also a little serious. He instinctively felt a hint of bloodthirsty threat from those guys, which would only happen to people who lived on the edge of blades all year round. And those guys were definitely not weak, especially that bearded man. He was probably more powerful than Basil. He should have just arrived in Chaos City. Those who came to Chaos City for the first time were the targets of the Grey Temple because the order in Chaos City was different from that of the Norland continent. Even in a city like Rodu, which was known for its good order, the crime rate was more than 10 times that of Chaos City. Murder was nothing out of the ordinary. However, it was different in Chaos City. As long as you violated the rules of Chaos City, no matter who you were, Chaos City would not ignore you. Those guys had the intention to kill someone on the street. This was a dangerous signal. They had to be vigilant. "Monkey, go to Mammis and wait for Master Brandley to come out. Report this to him. Although they haven't done anything out of line yet, they're enough to be listed as dangerous targets. We have to monitor them," Basil said seriously. "Yes." Monkey nodded before running toward Mammy Restaurant. If they were dangerous targets, it meant that they were at least 5th tier in power, and they were highly unstable. It was no small matter that such targets had appeared in the Aiden Square, which was a crowded place. "Mr. Mac, remember to come and pick up Amy early tonight," Crassus said to Meg after paying the bill. "Okay." Meg nodded. Crassus had told him in the morning that he couldn't send Amy back. "Goodbye, Master Halfbeard." Amy waved at Crassus. "Goodbye, little Amy." Crassus nodded with a smile, and left the restaurant. The lunchtime passed in a hectic manner. After sending off the last customer, Meg turned to Sally with a smile, and asked, "How many tickets were sent out this afternoon?" 380 tickets were sent out this afternoon. Sally counted the remaining tickets in her hand. Her expression was calm, but there was a hint of excitement in her eyes. After all, these tickets were sent out by her, and would determine whether the restaurant's food would be able to make it onto the Aiden Square Food Competition Rankings board. Sure enough, 2,000 tickets aren't enough. I think we'll be able to send out more than half of them today. Meg nodded without much surprise. The lunchtime was half an hour longer than in the morning, so there would be more customers, and there would be even more customers at night. "Boss, I think all of your food should be in the top 10. There's nothing better than your food," Yarbemia said sincerely to Meg. "It's not easy to make it to the top 10. Meg shook his head with a smile. The flow of customers in the Aden Square was even more exaggerated than in Chengdu's Chuanxi Road during the holidays. The restaurants that could make it to the top 10 were all quite large, so it wouldn't be difficult for them to send out thousands of tickets in a single day. Furthermore, some of the dishes in these high-end restaurants were even more expensive than Amy's, so it wouldn't be easy for them to make it to the top 10. However, Meg wasn't too concerned about this. After all, the system's mission was to get a dish into the top 30. According to his current progress, he should be able to complete that. Meg had a feeling that the system would give him more missions related to the Aden Square food competition in the future, so he had to control his ranking. If he made it to the top of the food competition rankings board on his first try, the system might just give him a mission to get the number 1 spot. I think Father's food should be in the top 10. It's so delicious, Amy said with a serious expression as she looked at Meg. It will be one day. Meg patted Amy's head with a smile before picking her up in his arms, and saying, "All right, go and take a nap. I'll take you to class." "All right." Amy lay down obediently on Meg's shoulder before closing her eyes. Meow, meow. Ugly Duckling scratched Meg's trouser leg with a pitiable expression, fearing that it would be abandoned by Meg. "Then you can go to sleep as well." Mag crouched down to scoop up Ugly Duckling before turning to Sally and Yarbemia with a smile as he said, "Then I'll leave the rest to you. If you're tired, you can rest for a while before you work again." "All right." Sally and Yarbemia nodded in unison before looking on as Meg made his way upstairs. "Aisha, you did even better in the afternoon. You're improving so quickly." Yarbemia turned to Sally with a smile before giving her a thumbs up. "You did much better than me." "I still have to study," Aisha replied modestly, but there was still a hint of elation in her eyes. When Meg came downstairs with Amy, the restaurant had already been refurbished. Sally had already left, and Yarbemia was sleeping on the table. "Sure, let MIA sleep for a while. We'll be quiet when we go out. She's working very hard," Meg said in a soft voice before heading out with Amy on his bicycle. "Millimeter. Amy nodded obediently before giving Ugly Duckling a warning glance so that it wouldn't wake Sally up. Meg rode the bicycle toward Chaos School with Amy. It was already past lunchtime, so there were fewer people on the road. As such, they were able to pass through the school without any issues, but there were a lot of people who turned to look at them. Chapter 285. Elizabeth's gaze followed Meg and Amy as they disappeared around the bend. The father and daughter pair gave her a strange feeling. They clearly looked like ordinary people, but for some reason, they gave her a sense of familiarity and danger. "Elizabeth, what are you thinking about?" At this moment, a middle-aged man, who was also wearing a snow-white robe that looked like it was carved out of frost, pushed open the door, and asked Elizabeth with a smile as she stood by the window. "Nothing, just 2 passers-by." Why Elizabeth retracted her gaze and looked back at the man with anticipation. "Uncle, you said you found something left behind by Father. Is that true? After the battle with Alex, he went missing for so many years, and there has been no news of him. I accidentally found it at an auction, and I can confirm that it belongs to Big Brother. However, there is a bloodline seal inside, and only you can open it. That's why I sent you a message." The man nodded and stretched out his right hand, and a small ice blue box appeared in his hand. Then, he flew it toward Elizabeth out of thin air. A hint of excitement appeared on Elizabeth's cold face. Her hands trembled slightly as she caught the small box. She took a deep breath and gently opened the lid. In the middle of the box, there was a ring inlaid with a round sapphire jade. "This is Father's ring," Elizabeth exclaimed softly. She picked up the ring, and her face was full of excitement. However, a nervous expression soon appeared on her face. "This is Father's favorite space ring, and he always carries it with him. If nothing happened, there's no way he would have lost it. Where did you get this ring?" "A mercenary picked it up in the wilderness. It was sold at an auction as an ordinary gemstone ring. I just happened to be at the auction with a friend, and I felt Big Brother's aura, so I bought it. Perhaps there are clues to Big Brother's disappearance inside. Open it and take a look." The man nodded slightly, and his expression was also a little serious. "All right." Elizabeth nodded, and an ice needle appeared out of thin air. She gently pricked her fingertip, and a drop of bluish-silver blood dripped onto the sapphire. It was instantly absorbed, and a ray of light rose from the ring. A mirror image of a middle-aged man with snow-white hair appeared. He looked at Elizabeth with a smile, and said, "Elizabeth, you're probably the only one who can find this ring. The others probably can't wait for me to die." "Father." Elizabeth looked at the man in slightly dirty clothes. The former king of the Frost Dragons, Rankster, had even left his space ring in the wilderness. What happened to him? It's very complicated, so I don't want to say too much. However, you can rest assured that I'm not dead yet. I threw the ring away on purpose. You just need to know that there's nothing in the ring, so you don't have to worry too much. No one will do anything to you for an empty ring, except for a fool, Rankster said casually with a hint of mockery. The image flashed, and the projection disappeared. The ring returned to its original appearance. "Father." Elizabeth reached out her hand in a daze, but she couldn't grab anything. She lowered her hand in disappointment. "Elizabeth, quickly check if there's anything in the ring," Fox said to Elizabeth with a nervous expression. "It's empty." Elizabeth looked at the ring, and a hint of surprise flashed across her eyes. However, she didn't show it. Instead, she put the ring back into the box with a disappointed expression. "It's empty." Fox was also disappointed. He looked at the ring in Elizabeth's hand, and withdrew his gaze. Elizabeth wasn't good at hiding her emotions. He could tell from her expression that there was something in the ring. "Uncle, can I take this ring as a souvenir?" Why Elizabeth looked up at Fox with a sorrowful expression. "Of course. This is something your father left behind. You can keep it." Fox quickly regained his composure. He nodded, and said, "I have something to do outside the city. It's rare for you to come to Chaos City. Stay for a few more days before you leave." Millimeter. Elizabeth nodded. She kept the little box in her hand, and watched as a bluish-silver light appeared under Fox's feet. He disappeared from the room in the blink of an eye. Chapter 286. The box slowly opened, revealing the ring inside. Elizabeth waved her hand gently, and a frost barrier appeared in the room, enveloping the entire room. This was one of the innate abilities of frost dragons. Apart from being able to seal off the probing of others, her own strength would also be enhanced within this barrier. After making sure that even if Fox turned around, he wouldn't be able to silently investigate her actions, Elizabeth picked up the ring in the box. From her father's words and Fox's change in attitude, Elizabeth could already see that something was fishy. Fox was most likely not really concerned about her father's whereabouts, but rather wanted to obtain something. Elizabeth walked to the side of the table, holding the ring in her hand. She gently brushed the surface of the table, and a letter and two palm-sized boxes, one gold and one silver, appeared on the table. Along with it was a long white piece of paper, with some scribbled black handwriting on it. "Child, show a disappointed expression and say there's nothing inside." This was the real reason why Elizabeth had decided to hide it from Fox. When she said there was nothing in the ring, she saw a trace of cold light disperse from Fox's fingertips. Fox had the strength of a grade 9 powerhouse. If he wanted to make a move on her, she would have no way of retaliating. She wouldn't even be able to break his frost barrier. In her memory, this youngest uncle of hers had doted on her in every possible way since she was young. He was one of the closest family members apart from her father. But today, he actually wanted to make a move on her because of a relic left behind by her father. What was the truth behind her father's disappearance? What did he leave behind that made Fox want to make a move on her? Looking at the two gem-studded boxes, Elizabeth reached out to pick up the letter at the side. It felt like a piece of hard ice in her hands. The silver-white envelope flashed with silver light, enveloping Elizabeth's entire body. Then, it instantly withdrew into the envelope, and a layer of frost floated from the envelope to the ground, revealing the real envelope. "Dear Elizabeth, my daughter, I'm very happy that you can read this letter. Forgive me for leaving without saying goodbye." Elizabeth opened the letter, and looked at the familiar scribbled handwriting on it. Her eyes gradually reddened. "After finding this letter, you don't have to look for me anymore, because I'm also looking for someone. It's obviously a stupid and time-consuming thing for you to follow me. I, Rankster's daughter, should stand at the top of the dragon race. The rumors about my disappearance were mostly about me being defeated by Alex and dying from severe injuries, right? Actually, that's not the case. Other than that important matter, I left this time to find Alex. I don't think he's dead. Also, I have something to tell you. 17 years ago, in Chaos City, I fell in love with a human woman named Jillian. However, I had to leave Chaos City because of some matters in my race. When I left, she was already pregnant with my child. According to my calculations, she should be 14 years old now. If I'm not wrong, she should have awakened my golden bloodline, the golden dragon bloodline from your grandmother. I'm very sorry to say this to you. Your mother's death was a huge blow to me, and I found peace and comfort in Jillian. However, I didn't want her and her mother to be involved in the dragon race's disputes, so I never visited them. I've always been very sorry. Here are 2 dragon origins. They're the coming-of-age ceremony I prepared for you and her. On your 20th birthday, absorb the frost dragon origins, and your bloodline will be completely awakened. You will become the first successor of the frost dragon race, and they will have to support you to become king. Before that, I hope you can help me find them. There shouldn't be too many of a golden dragon half-dragon in Chaos City. On her 18th birthday, give her this golden dragon origin so that she can completely awaken her golden bloodline and become a real dragon. Remember, apart from her, don't trust anyone else in this world, including your people. Back then, I stepped on countless dragon bones to ascend to the throne. They only have hatred in their hearts. You only have to do one thing, become stronger than them. Continue to step on their heads, and they will learn to be humble. Golden Dragon, sister? Elizabeth looked at the letter in her hand with a complicated expression. The paper suddenly crumbled and fell to the ground. Father, mother died because of you. Even though she didn't have any resentment toward you, how could you say that you fell in love with another woman? Elizabeth slowly clenched her fists, and her face turned pale. She looked at the 2 dragon origins on the table, and fell silent again. You left a woman when she was at her most vulnerable during her pregnancy. Father, is your throne really that important? You'd rather chase after a rival than find your own daughter. They're 2 pitiful women. How did they meet you? The anger in Elizabeth's eyes gradually dissipated, and she murmured to herself as she looked at the golden dragon origins in the golden box. After sending Amy to school, Meg went to the bookstore again, and filled a basket with books about the history of this world. As no race had ever ruled this world, there were no official or unofficial histories. Most of the information was recorded by bards, and Meg didn't know how reliable they were. In any case, he just treated them as leisurely reading material. Meg mainly used them to broaden his horizons. Perhaps it was because of the elven princess, Meg Alex's memory had many gaps, so his understanding of the Norland continent was actually not complete. For example, the Dragon Islands, the Undead Islands. There was very little information about them. It seemed that Irina was with him when he went to those places, so his memory was completely erased. Therefore, he could only slowly fill in his worldview with information and build a world that was completely his own. Mag went back to read for the whole afternoon, and then went to pick Amy up at around 4 o'clock. After dinner, he officially opened for business. The line outside the door was even longer than before, with hundreds of people lining up all the way into the square. It could be seen from afar, and the advertising effect was much better than standing at the door and shouting. Amy finished a plate of braised chicken and rice in front of all the customers, and orders for the braised chicken and rice, which had been crazily popular during lunch, skyrocketed again. System, give me another casserole, Meg said in his heart as he listened to the number of orders for braised chicken that Yarbemia reported. Please note that your current level of authority is too low, so you can't. The system's serious voice sounded. If sales of braised chicken and rice are doubled, the speed of upgrading the restaurant will increase by at least 1/3, right? Meg calmly said. Ding. The casserole has been placed in the 3rd cupboard. Please accept it. Ding. The price of this order is 10 gold coins. The fee has been successfully deducted. Meg opened the 3rd cupboard and took out an identical casserole. He nodded with satisfaction. The most time-consuming part of braised chicken was the half an hour of stewing. Increasing the number of casseroles was the easiest way to increase efficiency. Blackie looked at Anthem and asked, "Boss, are we going to keep eating, looking?" The 6 hunters walked out of a barbecue shop with big bellies. Burp. Of course we are. We've already searched 88 places. If we give up now, we'll be eating for nothing. Anthem rubbed his belly and waved his hand as he walked forward. Chapter 287. Why aren't Big Sister 1111 and Big Bear here yet? Amy sat on a high stool with Ugly Duckling in her arms. She rested her chin on the counter and looked toward the door. It was already dark outside, but Lulu and 1111 still hadn't arrived. Looks like Amy really likes that druid girl. Meg also noticed Amy's expectant look. She was very dependent on him, but she didn't expect much from anyone else. It's probably because he misses his mother. Meg sighed in his heart. Although he already wanted to give Amy all his love, she would definitely crave more and more motherly love as she grew older. Elves. Looks like I have to work harder at cooking. I won't be able to find Amy's mother if I'm not strong enough. Mag thought to himself as the knife in his hand moved faster and faster. Right now, the fastest way to improve his power was naturally to buy strength points from the system. However, it was also necessary for him to adapt and train his current body at night. 1111 walked backward in front of Lulu with a happy and expectant look on her face. "Lulu, I want to have 2 servings of braised chicken and rice, 1 sweet tofu pudding, and 1 Yangju fried rice tonight. What do you think?" "Okay, then you can eat 2 bowls less. That way, you can finish it." Lulu nodded his head dotingly. The bamboo box on his back was nowhere to be found. He pushed aside the willow branches behind 1111 and followed her unhurriedly. His eyes scanned left and right as if he was constantly on guard against something. "We might have to eat faster tonight. If those guys followed us to Chaos City, they're probably looking for us now," Lulu said softly. "HM, I will." 1111 nodded seriously. She wasn't perfunctory about this at all. It was almost 8 p.m. so the long line outside Amy's had already disappeared. There were still customers waiting for their seats in the restaurant, but they didn't have to wait too long because customers were coming and going. "Sister 1111, you're finally here." Amy's face lit up at the sight of 1111, and she slid off the high stool with Ugly Duckling in her arms before striding over to greet her. "Little Amy, you're such a good girl. Of course we'll come for such delicious food." 1111 smiled and reached out to stroke Amy's head. She squatted down and said matter-of-factly, "HM. Father's cooking is the best in the world." Amy nodded as she played happily with Ugly Duckling around 1111. "I didn't expect the little boss to have such a side to him. But it's so cute." When the guests saw this scene, they were all surprised. After all, in the eyes of many people, this little girl dared to use a fireball to burn the lava demon. "Then it's a deal, Novan. I'll get that old geezer Julian to come over in a few days, and you'll use spatial magic to cooperate with us to create a 3-in-1 magic wand." In the principal's office, Crassus waved his hand as he put away the complicated blueprint on the table, and looked at Novan, who was sitting behind the table. "Of course. However, you promised to teach the students of Chaos School melee magic for half an hour every month. You have to keep your promise," Novan said with a serious expression as he looked at Crassus. "Are you really going to let those little brats learn? Aren't you afraid of being called a bad influence on the students?" Crassus looked into Novan's eyes with an equally serious expression. "If learning melee magic from the Lord of Fire Crassus is a bad influence on the students, then wouldn't I be a bad influence on the thousands of students of Chaos School?" Novan asked with a smile. Crassus continued to look into Novan's eyes, and didn't reply. "I think melee magic is a new path for magic casters. As the pioneer, you've already successfully walked down that path. At the same time, you've also used over 100 years to prove that melee magic can also slay dragons and vanquish gods. Just based on this point alone, melee magic should be given enough attention. Whether the children choose to learn melee magic or long-range magic, I think this decision should be in their own hands. Perhaps there will be a day when magic casters can completely get rid of the awkward situation of being unable to retaliate in close combat. Novan also wiped the smile off his face as he looked at Crassus calmly. If someone else were to say this to me, I'd just take it as a joke. However, I believe in your words, Novan. A smile appeared on Crassus' face as he nodded, and said, but I'll say this first. I'll only teach some things to my disciples. Those little brats can come and listen to my lessons, and they can also learn melee magic, but they're not my disciples. I'll only accept one disciple. Alright, but little Amy is also a student of Chaos School. Novan also nodded with a smile. I have another condition. Give me a piece of land. I want to build a magic lab, Crassus continued. How big do you want it to be? Novan asked directly. Bigger than this one, Crassus replied without holding back at all. 10 times is enough. Novan's eyes lit up. Why do you want it to be so big? Do you really think I can move the Magus Tower here? Crassus pursed his lips. If there's anyone in this world who can do it, it's probably only you. Novan also smiled as he nodded, and said, you can decide how big you want it to be. You can tear down all the houses facing the street outside the Magic Academy. They're all school property. Alright, that's enough for me. Crassus nodded with satisfaction. He raised his hand, and said, let's go. I'll treat you to dinner today. I'll show you what real delicacies are. What delicacies haven't I tasted in Chaos City? Novan didn't seem very interested, but he still got up and walked out from behind the table. Don't be so confident, kid. It's definitely something you've never tasted before, Crassus said calmly. He wasn't angry at all, and walked out first. Is it really that good? Novan looked at Crassus back with a hint of doubt, and followed him out. Burp, burp, burp. A series of burps came out of the hunters' mouths. Their stomachs were all bulging, and they had unknowingly walked to the west side of the square. The youngest hunter looked at Anthem, and helplessly said, Boss, from the descriptions of those owners just now, they are indeed here today. However, we've searched all 100 restaurants on the list, and still couldn't find them. What should we do now? Chapter 288. Blackie, are you sure? Anthem's eyes suddenly widened, and his beard trembled. He looked at Blackie and asked. The longbow on the horse's back was already in his hand. A full moon hung high in the sky. Hearing this, the hunters' faces lit up, and they all stared at Hazy. Yes, I'm sure. I've been looking for them for decades. I can't be wrong. The fresh smell, the familiar smell, they're in that restaurant. Blackie's eyes had turned blood red, and he nodded with certainty. Brothers, this time, we can't let them escape from us. We don't have much time left. A cruel smile appeared on Anthem's face. He held the longbow in one hand and an arrow in the other. He said in a low voice, the hunt has begun. Ha ha. All the hunters took down the longbows on their horses, and their smiles were also cold. A red cloud floated in front of the moon, and it seemed to be covered with a faint layer of blood. A bloodthirsty and bloody aura appeared. Strands of blood-red light appeared around everyone. Grey-black hair appeared on their arms. Sharp claws and fangs appeared. Their eyes had already turned blood-red. They let go of the horses in their hands and surrounded the restaurant in a fan-shaped formation. No. These people are really going to attack. And their target is Mammoth. Monkey, who was leaning against a tree and yawning, suddenly changed his expression. He glanced at Mammoth, turned around, and ran away. He had been following them for the entire afternoon. Aside from the murderous intent they displayed toward the woman, they continued to visit all of the high-ranking restaurants in the Aiden Square according to the Aiden Square food rankings. They ate and drank as if they were a bunch of country bumpkins who had never been to a city before. As such, Brandley decided to downgrade them from a dangerous target to a potentially dangerous one, and told him to follow them and report back to him if anything were to happen. Monkey instinctively felt that they were looking for someone, but they didn't find her. Now, they seemed to have found the target, and it was in Mammoth. Whether they were looking for a guest or Mr. Mac, nothing could happen to Mammoth. This was Brandley's order, and also Beza's order, so he had to report the situation to Beza. A sharp whistle pierced through the night sky. Monkey. Not good. Beza turned around and looked in the direction of Amy's. His expression suddenly changed. Captain, what's wrong? Bob asked Beza. Monkey's warning. It seems that my guess was not wrong. They are indeed looking for someone, and now they have found the target. You ride back and report. Battle strength above level 7, Beza said quickly as he ran towards Amy's with his sword in hand. He was very grateful to Meg for what happened last time, so he had to protect the restaurant. Yes. Hearing this, Bob hurriedly ran to the horse tied to the side. His expression was also very grave. 7th tier magic caster was a 7th tier magic caster, and even Captain Beza was only a 5th tier knight. Boss, this Burning Legion's name sounds really cool. Sure enough, after going out for a trip, Boss has become even stronger. Yes, for the Burning Legion. It's also very catchy. But Boss, where are you bringing us to eat today? I haven't drunk in a long time. 5 lava demons surrounded Sargeras. Apart from Keel and Mond, there were 3 other burly lava demons with unfamiliar faces. They were all looking at Sargeras excitedly, and their eyes were full of fanatical worship. I didn't name the Burning Legion, and our slogan isn't that, either. Sargeras shook his head with a hearty smile. The second batch of lava warriors who had come to Chaos City to join him had finally arrived. The Burning Legion had officially begun to expand. Although there were only 6 lava warriors now, more lava warriors would arrive in batches after receiving the notice. If Boss didn't name it, then who did? Kossus, who was wearing red armor and missing an ear, asked curiously. Yeah. Then what's our slogan? Maxa, who had a cross-shaped scar on his forehead, also asked curiously. I'm more curious about what we're going to eat later, Kazak said with a silly smile. Tonight, I'll take you to eat something that can change the fate of our lava demons, Holy Ruggiamo. The name of the Burning Legion was given by that brilliant boss who made Ruggiamo, and our slogan. Sargeras' eyes gradually became more and more fanatical as he said in a low voice, for Ruggiamo. For Ruggiamo. Keel and Mond yelled in unison. The passers-by looked at them with confusion, not knowing what they were yelling about. For Ruggiamo? Boss, is that why you asked us to come to Chaos City this time? Kossus and the others were a little confused. That's right. Sargeras nodded. He looked at the 3 of them with a serious expression, and said, You'll find out soon. But there are a few things you have to remember. That restaurant is the hope for our lava demons to rise again, and it will be the holy land of us lava demons in the future. No matter what happens, you have to ensure the safety of the boss and the little boss. Also, the restaurant's rules. Boss, since that boss is just a normal person, why don't we just take him away? We'll make him make Ruggiamo for us every day for free. Kazak was a little confused. If you can defeat 2 10th tier magic casters and take the boss away, you'll be the leader of the lava demons in the future, Sargeras said with a smile, and continued walking. Well, I can't defeat them. Kazak rubbed his bald head and smiled embarrassedly. The group continued to walk forward. The 6 lava trolls walked together, and the pedestrians on the road subconsciously avoided them, casting sidelong glances at them. Werewolves. In the magic potion shop, Julian, who was mixing magic potions, looked at the door with surprise. He sniffed with his nose and raised his eyebrows. He slowly walked toward the door with his back hunched, and murmured to himself in a hoarse voice, I haven't beaten dogs in so many years. Dog. 6. 6. Charcoal yelled excitedly in his cage. In the restaurant, Lulu and 1111 had just sat down when a braised chicken and rice and a Ruggiamo was placed on the table. 1111 was enjoying the braised chicken and rice. Lulu took a bite of the Ruggiamo, and a happy expression appeared on her good-natured face. Right at this moment, 1111 suddenly raised her head and looked in the direction of the restaurant's entrance. She exclaimed, Lulu, they're here. Bam! Chapter 289. A head-sized hole appeared on the wooden door, and a black arrow pierced through it. The tail of the arrow quivered rapidly, and the sharp tip of the arrow glinted coldly as it pierced through Lulu's back. Although Lulu's body was huge, her speed and reaction were not slow at all. The moment she heard 1111's warning, she pressed one hand against the table and leapt into the air, while her other hand grabbed 1111's arm and pulled her up. The arrow passed under his body, pierced through the clothes on his back, and narrowly brushed past 1111's hand before nailing itself to the counter behind them. Half of the arrow was embedded into the counter, and the tail of the arrow was still quivering slightly. Warning! Warning! The restaurant is under attack. Attack level, level 7. The attack has exceeded the restaurant's defense level limit. At this moment, an ear-piercing alarm suddenly rang out in Meg's mind. At the same time, Meg also heard the sound of the wooden door shattering. His mind was instantly filled with terror, and he rushed out of the kitchen with the gold-rimmed kitchen knife in hand. He shielded Amy, who was sitting on the high stool, behind him. Seeing that she was unharmed, he breathed a sigh of relief. Looking at the arrow that had pierced through half of the counter, his expression was a little unsightly. Hey! Amy, who was sitting on the high stool, looked down at the arrow. She poked her little head out from behind Meg and asked curiously, "Father, are there bad guys causing trouble again?" "Yes, Amy, hide behind me and don't run around. The bad guys this time are very strong." Meg nodded, his expression grave. Amy's magic might be able to deal with a level 3 opponent, but the enemy this time was not someone Amy could deal with. "System, aren't you afraid that I'll be shot to death by this arrow?" Meg said in his mind, exasperated. Although the attack exceeded the restaurant's defense level, the system still made some minor adjustments to the trajectory of the arrow so that it did not injure the guest. Also, the wooden shavings on the door have been treated in chunks so that the guest's meal will not be affected. "Host, you should be thanking me," the system said calmly. Meg's heart calmed down slightly. The system's words at least proved that it still had some defensive capabilities, and that it did not want him to be killed. However, this level of defense was still a little too weak. It was urgent to upgrade the restaurant's defense level and improve the restaurant's defense. Lulu, holding on to 1111's hand as she landed heavily on the ground. She staggered, and her right hand gently around 1111's waist, her right hand. She looked in the direction of the door with a grim expression. "Those guys really did come," 1111 said softly as she clenched her fists. Wisps of green light rose from her body and connected her to Lulu like a thin string. It was as if a green ribbon had been tied between the two of them. "What's going on?" After a moment of silence, the guests looked at the gap in the wooden door and the arrow nailed to the counter. They finally realized what had happened. Some of the more timid guests screamed, but more of them looked around in panic. They did not know what had happened, but they instinctively sensed danger. The restaurant immediately fell into chaos. However, no one knew where the arrow came from, so no one acted rashly. Some people hid under the tables, but most of them remained in their seats. "This arrow is very powerful. MIA, come over here." Sally stood beside Meg without him noticing. She stood half a step forward and looked at the arrow. Her expression was still cold, but her eyes were a little solemn. As a 7th-level magician and a sharpshooter, she knew how difficult it was to aim at a target through a wooden door and kill 2 birds with 1 stone. Moreover, there was no magical wave on the arrow. Judging from the force used to break through the door, the person who shot it was at least 7th level. Sally was not going to make a move unless she had no other choice. Working as a waitress at Amy's was already very risky. If people found out that she was a 7th-level magician, they would probably come knocking on her door in a few days. However, Meg, Amy, and MIA were so good to her, so she naturally could not let them be in danger. The other party's target was obviously the couple. She just had to be careful not to get hurt. A light blue light lit up at her fingertips. It was not difficult for her to do this with her strength. If the other party's target was Meg and Amy, she did not believe that the Lord of Ice, who was not far away, would sit back and do nothing. All she had to do was wait until he made a move. Yarbemia looked at the gap in the wooden door and walked over with a frightened expression. She stood in front of Sally with the tray in her hand. She mustered up her courage and said, "I will block this arrow." A hint of surprise appeared in Sally's eyes at the sight of Yarbemia standing in front of her. She was clearly the weakest among all of them, yet Yarbemia had chosen to stand in front of her. She was struck by a peculiar feeling. Could it be that this was what friends were like? That little elf is not bad. Julian, who was standing outside the magic potion shop, glanced in the direction of the restaurant and nodded slightly. His black magician robe seemed to have merged with the darkness. Werewolves, I haven't seen them in so many years. I wonder if that old dog is still alive. Julian's gaze fell on the hunters who had drawn their bows and fanned out outside the restaurant. The tips of their arrows were all pointed in the direction of the restaurant. A faint red light was emitted from their bodies, and the air was filled with the smell of blood. Although they still maintained their human forms, their blood-red eyes were filled with the color of blood. Why are you all so panicked, Brandley? At the entrance of the Aiden Square, a black horse-drawn carriage pulled up the curtain, and Novan turned to look at Brandley, who was riding past a member of the inspection office. Principal. Brandley hurriedly reined in his horse upon hearing this voice. He was both elated and anxious as he said, "The inspection office has reported that someone is stirring up trouble in Chaos City. The target is extremely dangerous." Stirring up trouble? Where is it? Krasu also turned to Brandley with a question in his eyes. "You're here too, Master Crassus." According to the report, their target seems to be Amy's. Brandley was slightly startled to hear Crassus' voice, but he still hurriedly replied. The main reason why he had rushed here in such a hurry was because of Amy's. If something were to happen to Amy, who knew what kind of wrath the Lord of Ice and the Lord of Fire would have to bear? "Let's go." Amy's. Crassus' voice immediately became cold with a hint of concern. Monkey lowered his eyes and didn't dare to say anything. There were two important figures in the horse-drawn carriage that even Master Brandley had to treat with respect, so he obediently led the way. Thus, 2 horses and a black horse-drawn carriage set off toward Amy's. Chapter 290. The restaurant instantly fell silent, and everyone's eyes fell on Lulu and 1111. Not everyone in the restaurant was a powerless commoner, but the arrow just now was enough to make them sit down in fear of harming the innocent. Even a knight wouldn't act recklessly for the sake of 2 strangers without knowing the reason. However, judging from the arrow and the words just now, those who dared to make a move on the streets of Chaos City and even threatened to kill everyone in the restaurant were definitely not kind people. Since they were here for them, they would have to rely on them to solve the problem. Little Amy had 2 masters who were great magic casters, so those who knew about this weren't worried that someone would really dare to kill Amy's. Perhaps even the Grey Temple wouldn't dare to do something like that. Kill them all? How arrogant. Meg raised his eyebrows. Threatening customers was a serious blow to the restaurant's reputation, and it also made him very angry. He directly asked in his mind, "System, how much is a Barrett M82A1 sniper rifle?" "You can't afford it," the system replied very quickly. Meg was speechless, but he still didn't give up. "I want a loan." The system doesn't provide loan services. The host's elephant food bar credit is now 100 gold coins, so you can't afford it either, the system replied calmly. "You win." Meg felt a little helpless. It seemed like the idea of getting a gun from the system wouldn't work at all. The system probably wouldn't charge a low price for something that could be classified as a weapon of mass destruction. It was really doing its best to maintain the stability of this world. It didn't even want to earn money. Julian should be here by now, right? How did these 2 people provoke those guys outside? They have been hunting them for decades. Could it have something to do with the massacre of the Druids? Meg looked at Lulu and 1111, the Druid couple. A few questions flashed through his mind, but he didn't rush to say anything. The situation was unclear, and he wasn't sure if Julian was here, so standing behind Sally was the best choice. He knew that Sally was a 7th-tier magic caster, but he was also a little touched that Yarbemia was standing in front of him. It seemed a little silly to value others more than oneself, but it was indeed very cute 20 years ago. A hint of pain appeared on 1111's face, and she subconsciously clenched her fists. They had stayed in that village for 1 night, and the entire village was slaughtered by those people. Even the newborn children weren't spared. The 2 listened to the desperate screams behind them. Those kind villagers died one after another. They stayed in the forest for more than 3 years, and they didn't see a single person. And now, the same choice was placed in front of them, just like 20 years ago when they were blocked by the red-eyed werewolves in the village. They dared to say that, and they dared to do it. They were a bunch of heartless executioners. Don't worry, the same thing won't happen again, Lulu said with certainty as she held 1111's hand tightly. Big Sister 1111, are the bad guys here to make trouble for you? Amy climbed onto the high stool and put Ugly Duckling on Meg's other shoulder. She poked her little head out of the other shoulder and looked at 1111 with a completely unconcerned expression. Meow tilde Ugly Duckling, who was standing on Meg's shoulder, was a little afraid of heights. It put its 4 feet together and tried its best to lean toward Meg's head with a fearful expression. 1111 seemed to have regained her strength after being held by Lulu. She turned to Amy with a reluctant expression and nodded as she said, "That's right, little Amy. We won't see each other again for a long time. I'll miss you." "Why?" "Big Sister 1111 likes Father's food so much. Why don't you stay in Chaos City? That way, you can come here every day." Amy looked at 1111 with a puzzled expression. Then, she looked outside the restaurant and seriously said, "As for the bad guys, Amy can chase them away with a fireball." "I'm afraid I can't do that this time." 1111 shook her head sadly. The World Tree's rebirth was right in front of them, but they had to leave now. Otherwise, it would only bring disaster to everyone present. They didn't want to see the misfortune of the past happen again. "Let's go." Lulu stroked 1111's hair gently. She took a step forward, and her clothes were all torn apart. She instantly transformed into a huge black bear that was nearly 3 meters tall. Her fur was black, and she covered more than 2 meters with each step. She slapped the dilapidated door of the restaurant and rushed out sideways. She leaped high into the air and pounced on Anthem, who was standing in the center of the restaurant. Her huge bear paw, which was as thick as a hammer, smashed toward his head. "Sorry. Goodbye," 1111 said. Her body flashed with green light, and she instantly transformed into a white cat that was 1/2 meter long. Green light rose from her feet, and she rushed out of the restaurant behind the big bear. She was slender and strong, and her speed was also very fast. A light green silk thread was still connecting the two of them. However, the couple who had just been showing off their love had now turned into a black bear and a white cat in the blink of an eye. This change made the customers in the restaurant widen their eyes involuntarily as they looked at this scene in shock. "System, you should have a backup door, right?" Meg looked at the empty door, and his eyelids twitched. It had only been a few days, and 2 of the doors had been broken. How could he open the restaurant in peace? "I have enough stock," the system replied calmly. "You have foresight." Meg pursed his lips. He felt that the system's words sounded a little fishy. It was as if it had already known that the door would continue to be broken. "Wow. Big Bear is really a big bear. Big Sister 1111 has turned into a beautiful cat, but why does she look a little like Ugly Duckling?" Amy also widened her eyes at this scene. She wrapped her arms around Meg's neck and said anxiously, "Father, let's go and help. Amy has to beat up the bad guys. We can't let them bully Big Sister 1111. No, it's too dangerous." Meg shook his head and untied Amy's arms from around his neck. He turned around and looked into her eyes and said seriously, "Amy, you have to remember that the premise of helping others is that you won't be in danger. I don't want to see you get hurt." "But..." Amy looked into Meg's eyes and then looked toward the door. Her blue eyes were clear and bright, and she asked seriously, "Father, shouldn't we protect the people we love? I like Big Sister 1111, and I don't want her to get hurt. So, can we help her?" "Of course." Meg looked at Amy's expectant eyes and was silent for a while. Then, a smile appeared on his face. He picked up Amy in one hand and held the gold-rimmed kitchen knife in the other, and walked toward the door of the restaurant. Chapter 291. The giant black bear slammed the door and stepped on the ground with a bang. It jumped high and slapped Anthem with its paw. The black shadow hung down, and the huge bear paw whistled with the wind. It was very oppressive. "Howl." Anthem raised his head and howled. There was no panic in his eyes. The blood-red color became more and more intense. Instead of retreating, he took a step forward. His body grew taller, his clothes were torn, and his normal face twisted into a huge black wolf head. He had turned into a 3-meter-tall werewolf in an instant. Grey wolf hair covered his whole body, and his claws were sharp. The werewolf stomped on the ground heavily, shattering the bluestone slabs on the ground. He leaped high toward the giant bear, raising his sharp claws with a touch of blood red flowing on them. He clawed at the giant bear's chest. Bang! The two 3-meter-tall giant beasts collided in midair, producing a heavy muffled sound. The blood-red claws tore through the giant bear's broad chest, leaving behind a bloody wound. At the same time, the giant bear's paw also slapped the werewolf's face. Half of the werewolf's face was distorted, and one of its teeth flew out. The giant bear and the werewolf fell to the ground at the same time and took a few steps back. Then they collided again. The giant bear's claws left wounds on the giant bear's body, while the giant bear's paw left dents on the werewolf's body. Bang, bang, bang. After separating, they collided again and again. Their attacks were extremely violent. It was hard to imagine that these two giant beasts could have such terrifying speed. The stone slabs on the ground outside the restaurant were pulverized under their feet, and a tree that was as thick as a person's encirclement was snapped in half. All of the customers in the restaurant were stunned by the sight of flesh and blood flying everywhere. It was very rare to see such a scene in Chaos City. Thrilling was not enough to describe it. At this moment, a white cat leaped out of the dining hall, stepping on a green light. The green light flashed, and a green 3-leaf clover mark appeared between the white cat's eyebrows. The green ribbons that connected the two of them suddenly brightened. The giant bear's body was instantly covered with a layer of green light, and the green light kept flowing into his wounds. The bleeding stopped, and the wounds healed at a speed visible to the naked eye. His body suddenly swelled up, and he slapped Anthem away. Catch her! Anthem's sharp claws left a shocking crack on the ground. He turned his head and spat out a mouthful of blood. He glanced at the nimble white cat and cried out. The werewolves fired their crossbows in unison, and several arrows simultaneously sealed off the white cat's escape route. Decades of hunting cooperation had given them a strong tacit understanding. Awoo! 3 of the werewolves raised their heads and howled. Their bodies grew to more than 2 meters tall, and they were also half-wolf and half-human werewolves. They landed on all fours and rushed toward 1111. They could lose the team battle, but the healer had to die. There was a trace of panic in the white cat's pale golden eyes. A green light flashed under its feet, and its speed suddenly increased by a notch, narrowly dodging the arrows that were shot at it. A few black seeds fell to the ground, and with a sweep of green light, they instantly sprouted and grew into green vines, entangling the 3 werewolves that were pouncing at it. Meanwhile, the white cat climbed up the side of the wall and ran up in a snake-like manner, narrowly avoiding the arrows that were shot at it. 2 druids. A hint of surprise appeared on Urian's face as he looked at the giant bear and the white cat that were connected by a green thread. He cast his gaze toward the white cat that was flashing nimbly on the wall, and murmured to himself, if I recall correctly, the heart of the world tree disappeared back then. Could it be, with 1111's support, Lulu's momentum instantly overshadowed Anthem's? He stamped his feet on the ground and rushed toward Anthem again. Then, he smashed Anthem's head into the ground with his palm. The huge wolf's head sank into the ground, and cracks spread out from his body. Boss! The werewolves were all shocked by this scene. They didn't expect that the big bear's strength had increased after a while, and now it was even suppressing Anthem. However, they still didn't know what the situation was. The 3 werewolves tore apart the growing vines. They didn't rush to chase 1111, who was dodging the arrows on the wall. Instead, they surrounded Lulu in a triangular formation. After decades of hunting, no one knew them better than they did. The white cat was fast and agile, but its ability was more inclined towards healing and helping others to improve their fighting strength. It was not easy to catch up with it. The big bear was powerful enough, but it lacked flexibility and speed. It was almost impossible to escape from their encirclement in this terrain. As long as they could catch the big bear, the white cat wouldn't go far. Without the white cat's magic, they couldn't even defeat Anthem. They had always lived and died together, which was their Achilles heel. Anthem was smashed into the ground by Lulu's fists. Every sound was particularly dull. It seemed that Lulu had gained the upper hand. At this moment, a red cloud floated over the bright moon in the sky. The pale red moonlight fell on everyone, and the bloodthirsty aura of the werewolves soared in an instant. The werewolf, who had been suppressed by Big Bear and had no power to fight back, suddenly burst out with a red light. He raised his sharp claws, which were dyed red with bloodlust, and directly tore open a bloody wound on Big Bear's chest. Then, he raised his leg and kicked Big Bear's abdomen, directly sending him flying 5 or 6 meters and crashing into a row of trees. Blood Moon, give me endless power. Anthem slowly stood up. The red moonlight shone on his body, and his completely deformed head began to recover at a speed visible to the naked eye. The grey wolf hair grew longer, and the outermost layer was dyed with a layer of red, as if it was on fire. Eat, brave werewolves, the flesh and blood of the enemy is the most delicious food. Anthem's face showed a cruel smile, and his momentum had been raised to the extreme, more terrifying than before. The 3 sharp claws on his right hand stretched half a meter long, and he strode toward Lulu. Awoo! The rest of the werewolves transformed in an instant and rushed toward Lulu on all fours. It seemed that they were going to eat her first. Go! Lulu let loose an enraged roar in 1111's direction. The wound on his chest was so deep that his bones were visible, and the red light from the wound was corroding the healing green light. However, Lulu had no intention of backing down. He stood up with a thick tree in his arms, and charged toward the 6 werewolves who were baring their sharp fangs and red eyes. Chapter 292. Huh? What's going on? Is someone fighting? Boss, didn't you say people shouldn't fight in Chaos City? Kosath and Karzak asked curiously, craning their necks to look in the direction of Amy's. It shouldn't be. Sargeras raised his eyebrows. Even he didn't dare to make trouble in Chaos City. After all, the Grey Temple and the City Lord's castle both had 10th tier combat power. Oh no. It seems that someone is making trouble in Mr. Mack's place. It's our mission to protect Mr. Mack. Prepare to fight. Sargeras soon saw the place where the fight was taking place. His expression became very serious, and he strode quickly toward Amy's. Fight. Keel, Mond, and the others' eyes lit up, and they quickly followed Sargeras. They hadn't fought side by side for many years, and this time, they were fighting for the Holy Ruggiamo. Ha, you're finally willing to come down. Anthem's voice came from under the net of vines. His sharp red claws tore the vines apart in an instant. He jumped high, and his sharp claws slashed down at 1111 who was flying in the air. Watch out! Lulu exclaimed, and the tree in her hand chopped down at Anthem. A touch of panic flashed through 1111's eyes. A turquoise light rose from under her feet, and at the same time, a small turquoise shield appeared under her. Crack! The small shield shattered almost instantly. Although 1111's speed had increased, she still couldn't escape from the claws. The sharp claws tore her abdomen, and she flew upside down and landed at the entrance of the restaurant. Her snow-white fur was dyed red in an instant. She couldn't maintain her cat form anymore, and turned back into her human form. She lay on her side on the ground, blood gushing out of the wound on her abdomen. Her face was pale, and she couldn't move. Lulu's eyes were bloodshot, and she swung the tree at Anthem. Anthem crossed his hands above his head, and was smashed down from the air. His feet sank half a meter into the ground, and his sharp claws cut the thick wood into pieces. He walked toward Lulu step by step, and said in a cold voice, "Kill her." All the werewolves turned their eyes to 1111 in unison. They grinned cruelly, and their sharp claws rubbed against each other, making a grinding sound. They had been waiting for this moment for many years. As long as they killed her, everything would be over. Enjoying the enemy's flesh and blood was the best way to celebrate. 1111's tea. Lulu roared desperately. She wanted to rush to the door crazily, but Anthem slapped her back. The blood-red claws left several bloody holes on her body. Without the help of the green light, her momentum was declining rapidly. Lulu. Go! 1111 looked up at Lulu, her eyes full of heartache and reluctance, but she still shouted with all her strength. "None of you can leave today." Anthem waved his claws again and scratched off half of Lulu's shoulder. Blood gushed out, and her whole arm was almost torn off. All the werewolves walked toward 1111. Lulu had no power to resist under Anthem's claws. The bloodthirsty effect of the blood moon made his hands more powerful than before. The customers in the restaurant and the surrounding crowd couldn't bear to see this scene, but in the face of such a terrifying and bloodthirsty werewolf, no one dared to step forward to help the poor couple. Some even turned their faces away, not wanting to see the cruel scene that was about to unfold. The target is extremely dangerous. Pity, bravery, sacrifice. Bazza looked at the werewolves walking toward 1111 and slowly pulled out the long sword at his waist. 5 level 4 and 5 werewolves were far more powerful than him, but as a knight and a member of the Inspector of the Grey Temple, his mission was to go against the rules. It is indeed the heart of the World Tree, and a new World Tree has been bred. Unfortunately, it has withered. Urian looked at 1111's lower abdomen, and his eyes narrowed slightly as he murmured to himself, "The nature magic of the Druids is comparable to the life magic of the Elven race, but without the World Tree, they won't be able to cultivate, and the Druids will have no hope of ever rising again. So be it. That old guy asked me to find those 2 little guys for him. Looks like they're the 2. Julian looked at the werewolves walking toward 1111 and took half a step forward. In the darkness, streaks of frost appeared under his feet. The werewolves had raised their claws. Facing 1111, who had no power to fight back, they could crush her with one claw and bathe them in fresh blood. Stop. At this moment, a shout came from the restaurant. The leading werewolf was stunned. He looked into the restaurant and saw a human man standing at the door with a child in one hand and a gold-rimmed kitchen knife in the other. The voice came from him. All of the customers in the restaurant and the passers-by outside also turned to look at Mag in unison with astonishment in their eyes. Who would have thought that someone would dare to come out in the face of a bloodthirsty werewolf? Mr. Mac is crazy. The 2 magic casters are not here today. Mr. Mac is indeed a man of character. He actually dashed out with a kitchen knife. His courage and guts make me feel ashamed. Although Little Boss is powerful, she is still much weaker than those werewolves. What if she gets hurt? Everyone couldn't help but discuss softly and nervously when they saw this scene. They were still very interested in Meg and his daughter. After all, they couldn't taste such delicacies other than Amy's. Many customers who were prepared to watch quietly began to gather magic or grab the weapons beside them. Big Sister 1111. Amy looked at 1111, who was lying in a pool of blood, and struggled to jump from Meg's arms to the ground. She ran over to her and looked at her with concern in her eyes. "Little Amy, go away." 1111 looked up at Amy, and shook her head with concern on her pale face. If they were destined to die here today, she didn't want to see innocent people die because of them, especially the adorable little Amy. "Bad people. Stupid dog. I won't let you bully Big Sister 1111 and Big Bear." Amy spread open her arms and stood in front of 1111. 2 balls of bluish-purple flames rose from her little hands. "Little girl, you've got guts. Having the heart of a powerhouse is the foundation of becoming a true powerhouse. I didn't misjudge you." Julian's footsteps faltered as he looked at Amy. However, a black wand had already appeared on his fingertips, and there seemed to be a hint of cold light shimmering on its tip. "It's been a long time since I've tasted a child. I really do miss it. Why don't we try it again today? This little girl must taste really good." The werewolf leader looked at Amy, and licked his lips with a hint of lust in his eyes. "I'll think of 100 ways to kill you if you say something like that." Mag withdrew his gaze from the magic potion shop out of the corner of his eye, and stood in front of Amy with his cleaver in hand. His expression was extremely cold. In that instant, his thirst for power became extremely strong. If he were powerful enough, this cleaver would be in that werewolf's head right now. "Kill me." The werewolf threw his head back and roared with laughter at the sight of Meg and the kitchen knife in his hand. He raised his sharp claws and slashed down at Meg. "Stupid and cowardly human. How dare you threaten me?" he sneered. Red light flashed on his sharp claws. If those claws fell on Meg, they would most likely kill him instantly. Julian raised his hand, and Beza rushed out of the crowd with his sword. Many passers-by looked away or closed their eyes. They didn't want to see such a kind father and daughter lose their lives trying to protect a stranger. Protect Mr. Mac. For the Ruggiamo. At this moment, a powerful roar suddenly sounded from behind. A figure covered in flames rushed over like a meteor. In the blink of an eye, he arrived at the entrance of the restaurant. A black iron chair whizzed through the air and smashed into the face of the werewolf who had raised his sharp claws, instantly sending him flying. For the Ruggiamo. Chapter 293. Basil was already halfway to the werewolf with his sword drawn. Sally, who was standing behind Meg, was ready to strike. Yarbemia, who was standing behind them, threw the tray over their heads and smashed it at the werewolf. Bang! The werewolf that raised its sharp claws at Mag was smashed in the face by a black folding chair. Its horrifying wolf head was deformed, and then it was sent flying in an instant. Half of its fangs were knocked off by a flying tray in mid-air, and it landed 10 meters away with a loud crash. Who dares to hurt Mr. Mac? I'm here. Sargeras, who was holding a black foldable chair in one hand and standing in front of Mag, said domineeringly, "Don't worry, I'm going to kill you." Red lava was flowing in the cracks, and white smoke was rising from the air. The tall Sargeras was like a burning torch in the dark, making everyone's eyes light up. What? Meg looked at Sargeras in surprise and confusion. He had let Amy stand in front of 1111 because Julian and Sally were standing behind them. These werewolves, who were obviously only at level 4 or level 5, couldn't pose any threat to them. However, he didn't expect Sargeras to appear out of nowhere and send that werewolf flying with a folding chair. Mag was a little touched, but when he thought of the slogan they had shouted earlier, his lips twitched uncontrollably. For Ruggiamo? What kind of stupid slogan is that? Mag cursed inwardly, but he didn't know where to start all of a sudden. However, since Sargeras had made his move, and Urien was on his side, today's battle would be over, and he felt much more at ease. He was sent flying. Isn't that the lava demon who comes to the restaurant every day to eat Ruggiamo? I didn't expect him to be so powerful. No wonder Mr. Mac didn't panic at all. He didn't care about those werewolves at all. His hiding such a powerful fighter. When the customers in the restaurant saw this scene, they couldn't help but open their mouths wide in shock. Sargeras was no stranger to the regulars. After all, he always brought his own chair and only ordered Ruggiamo. It was hard not to remember him when he ate with fire all over his body. However, he usually behaved very honestly in the restaurant. He only sat at the entrance of the restaurant and often taught the 2 lava demons that came with him to eat quietly. They didn't expect him to be so powerful after entering battle mode. His attacks were even more efficient. That slap on the werewolf's face seemed to have vented all the anger that had accumulated in everyone's hearts, making them feel comfortable to their heart's content. Mr. Mac is really something. Everyone's eyes fell on Meg, who was standing at the door calmly with a kitchen knife in hand. Not everyone had the mentality of being able to remain calm in the face of a landslide. A lava demon at the peak of 7th tier. Sally looked at Sargeras's back, and the blue light in her hand disappeared. She had a clear judgment in her mind. In this case, there was no need for her to make a move. She turned to 1111, who was lying at the door, and murmured a few spells. A pale blue light fell on her lower abdomen, and the red light on the wound faded quickly, and the bleeding stopped. So powerful. Yarbemia looked at Sargeras's back, and couldn't help but open his mouth. He didn't expect this demon, who was always so friendly to him, to be so powerful. He sent the werewolf flying with just one slap. Amy poked her head out from behind Meg, and said happily, "Wow, big bald head, you're awesome. Haha, it's not a problem to deal with a few wolf puppies." Sargeras looked back with an honest smile, as if this was the first time that Amy had praised him. He glanced at the werewolves, who had stepped back subconsciously, and grinned. He waved his hand at Keel and the others, who were charging at him with flames all over their bodies, and said, "Burning Legion, attack. For Ruggiamo." Keel and the others roared in unison, and rushed at the werewolves, waving their maces, black iron bars, and other weapons. Awoo! The werewolves were not afraid. They howled and also rushed at the burning legion, waving their sharp claws. They collided with each other with a loud bang. Sharp claws and weapons collided with each other, making ear-piercing sounds. Blood and lava splashed in all directions. With a series of muffled sounds, the battle instantly became chaotic. There are so many nosy people in this place. Who gave you the courage to provoke our werewolf warriors? Anthem slapped away Lulu, who had transformed into a big bear, with his paw. Lulu, who had been sent flying several meters away, turned back into her human form. Her whole body was stained with blood, and there were horrible bumps and hollows all over her body. She lay on her back on the ground, making hoarse sounds in her throat. She turned her head to look in the direction of the restaurant's entrance, trying to find 1111. Probably, Ruggiamo, Sargeras said with a grin. Sargeras grinned. He carried the iron chair with one hand and strode toward Anthem. Every step he took left a lava pit on the ground. You're courting death. Anthem snorted and also strode toward Sargeras. He opened his hands, and his half-meter-long red claws looked a little strange in the moonlight. He crossed his hands and slashed at Sargeras's neck. Get out of here! Sargeras yelled as he swung the folding chair in his hand directly at Isam's face, creating a whistling sound as it pierced through the air. The red claws collided with the iron chair first. The claws could easily break the thick skin of the bear, but they could only cause a string of sparks on the chair. Accompanied by a series of clanking sounds, the folding chair continued to slap Anthem in the face. Bang! The werewolf, who was more than 3 meters tall, flew backward as if he had been hit by a truck. He landed heavily on the ground 5 meters away, making a big pit. Who gave you the courage to attack Mr. Mac? Sargeras walked toward Anthem, who was struggling to get up, with the chair in his hand. His voice was full of sarcasm. Although they were both at level 7, he had been at that level for decades. Besides, he had eaten so many Ruggiamos recently. It was estimated that he was only 100 or 200 Ruggiamos away from level 8. That was why Sargeras called Ruggiamo Holy Ruggiamo. As long as you eat Ruggiamo, you can become stronger. Is there a simpler way? In this world, only Meg could make Ruggiamo like this. Therefore, his safety was related to the revival of the lava race. These fellows attacked Boss Mag because they wanted to destroy the lava tribe's hope. The enemy had to die. Chapter 294. Lava Demons. It's been a long time since there was an 8th tier lava demon, right? That damned old man was a lava demon when he first started playing melee magic, right? Urian also withdrew his hand and looked at Sargeras' back with a hint of surprise. Their strong physiques allowed them to choose to engage in close combat, and their almost monstrous affinity for fire gave them unparalleled talent for fire magic. It could be said that all lava demons were born fire-type magic casters. Their powerful melee combat abilities and fearsome fire magic talent had made this race famous in the history of the Norland continent, and they had even been ranked as one of the top 10 demon races. However, several hundred years ago, the lava demon clan had suffered some kind of unforeseen event. It was as if they had been cursed, and the younger members of the clan could not even break through the Tier 3 seal. Those who could reach Tier 6 and above had become rare geniuses. The strength of the lava clan declined sharply. After the powerful warriors in the clan gradually withered away, they were involved in the racial war. The once powerful demon clan was almost wiped out. Now, no one knew where they were living in seclusion on the demon island. It was very rare to see them walking on the continent. This demon's strength surprised him. He was at the peak of the 7th tier. He should be very close to the 3rd tier seal. He was most likely the most powerful member of the lava demons now. A level 10 lava demon is truly a war machine. Urian withdrew his gaze, and thought to himself, compared to pure warriors and magic casters, this kind of dual-attribute guy has the ability to change the outcome of a battle. Antham looked at Sargeras, who was walking towards him with a chair in his hand. For the first time, there was a trace of panic in his blood-red eyes. The previous collision had made him feel the terrifying power of Sargeras, and the rising flames on Sajara's body directly destroyed all his bloodlust. Now, he was almost completely suppressed. Even though his strength had been raised to the extreme under the blood moon, he still felt powerless in the face of this big guy with flames all over his body. Going against us werewolves is the stupidest decision you've ever made in your life. No matter where you are in the future, be ready to be hunted by werewolf warriors at any time. Live forever. Antham said in a cold voice. The red light on his red claws became brighter and brighter. It seemed that he was trying to negotiate. Bang! The only response he got was a folding chair slamming into his face. He had clearly seen Sajara's raise his hand, clearly saw the trajectory of the folding chair, and even felt the wind brought by the chair. However, he felt that he could not avoid it. He raised his sharp claws to block in front of him, but was still slapped back into the large pit where he had just stood up. If you want to fight, cut the crap. Sajara strode over, gripped the legs of the chair with both hands, and hit Anselm, who was trying to get up in a daze. Bang! 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 A series of dull thuds rang out. Everyone's jaws dropped as they watched Anthem, who seemed to have everything under his control and was about to go on a killing spree, being slammed into the pit by Sajara's chair without the slightest ability to fight back. In the end, such a powerful werewolf was actually defeated by a folding chair. This scene was shocking and somewhat comical, and the tension that had been building up earlier instantly disappeared. At the same time, Keel, Mond, and the others successfully encircled and annihilated the remaining 4 werewolves. They were all beaten to the ground, and the weapons in their hands were unceremoniously thrown at them. They didn't have the slightest ability to fight back. If they were hunting in the forest, the werewolves might have an advantage in terms of speed and stealth. However, in a face-to-face battle like this, they had gone through life and death on the undead islands, and they were no weaker than anyone of the same level. This was under the premise that Sajaras had asked them not to use magic. But did they protect Mr. Mac because of Ruggiamo? A customer in the restaurant asked with a strange look. Not only that, but their slogan seems to be for Ruggiamo. Another person nodded. That's probably the charm of Mr. Mac's food, a skinny young man said excitedly. I just thought that I might not be able to eat such delicious tofu pudding again, and I wanted to fight that werewolf with my chopsticks. The others looked at his thin arms and legs, but they didn't show any sarcasm. Instead, they nodded in agreement. He was not the only one who wanted to fight just now. I didn't know that lava demons were so powerful. But in this case, compared to slowly upgrading the restaurant, relying on the strength of the customers is a good way to improve the security of the restaurant. Meg's eyes lit up, and an idea popped into his mind. Of course, spontaneously fighting for justice was very uncertain, so it was urgent to improve their own strength and the restaurant's security. The bad guys were all beaten down by Baldy and Baldy too. It turns out that Baldy is quite powerful. Amy, who was standing behind Meg, looked at the scene with wide eyes. Suddenly, she thought of something. She quickly turned around and squatted down. Looking at 1111's pale face, she asked worriedly, Sister 1111, are you all right? Save Lulu. 1111's face was as pale as a sheet of paper, but her eyes were fixed on Lulu, who was lying on the ground. Her voice was very weak. There was still a red glow on her wound, and the blood still hadn't stopped flowing. Sister Isha, can you save Sister 1111 and Big Bear? You're the only one who can save them. Amy looked up at Isha and asked anxiously and earnestly. If Isha could cure Father's hand, she could definitely save Sister 1111 and Big Bear. Mag also turned to look at Sally. She was indeed the only one present who had the ability to do so. However, if she didn't want to expose her identity, then it would be best for her to stay on the sidelines and protect herself. Sally did indeed look hesitant. Life magic was different from ordinary healing magic. Anyone with a little knowledge could easily tell that she was using life magic. If she did that, there was a high chance that her identity would be exposed. Chapter 295. The trees in the square near the restaurant looked as if they had been ravaged by a tornado. Several of them were broken, and there were traces of a battle everywhere. It had been a while since the Aden Square had seen such a devastating battle between beings of at least the 7th tier, which meant that it had to be a battle between beings of the 7th tier or higher. Fortunately, my precious disciple is fine. The carriage stopped, and Crassus lifted the curtain and came out. Seeing Amy standing at the entrance of the restaurant, his face relaxed a little. He looked past Julian and saw the werewolf being beaten by Sargeras with a folding chair. Crassus narrowed his eyes. It seemed that the battle was over. Everyone's attention was focused on the entrance of the restaurant, and no one noticed the black carriage coming from behind. Hearing Crassus' words, Brandley breathed a sigh of relief. He was most worried that something had happened to Amy. If something had happened to Amy, Crassus and Julian would be angry. The damage caused by 2 10th tier great magic casters would be unimaginable in this corner of the Aden Square. Awoo! At this moment, Anthem suddenly let out a mournful howl, and the wolf fur on his body almost all turned blood red in an instant. Accompanied by the crisp sound of bones crisscrossing, his body, which was already more than 3 meters tall, grew by half a meter again. He raised his paw and slapped the folding chair that Sargeras was waving at him. Sparks flew, and Sargeras was forced back a few steps by the sudden increase in strength. Since this is the city of chaos, it should be chaotic. Since you all want to die, I'll fulfill your wishes. Aunt Ham stood up. Red spikes protruded from his back, as if he was carrying 2 rows of flags on his back. Blood oozed out of his body, forming a layer of red blood mist outside his body. The smell of blood permeated the air, and the air was filled with the thick smell of blood. Awoo! The eyes of the other werewolves, who were being suppressed and beaten up, also turned blood red. Their auras suddenly increased, and they all struggled to jump up. Some of them crazily slapped away the surrounding lava demons, and stared straight at the customers in the restaurant with their scarlet eyes. Werewolf warriors, kill them all. Use their blood to make up for the damage caused by the madness. Anthem waved his hand in the direction of the restaurant, and said coldly, kill. As soon as his voice fell, he stepped forward and turned into a blood-red wolf with spikes on his back. He pounced on the floor-to-ceiling window of the restaurant, and the rocks under his feet shattered instantly. He was like a heavy truck that accelerated to the extreme in an instant. Kill. The werewolves also squeezed out a word from their mouths. At the same time, they transformed into giant wolves and pounced toward the restaurant's entrance and into the restaurant. Burning essence blood to go berserk would cause irreversible damage to the body, so these people deserved to die. They had to use their blood to replenish the weakness after going berserk. This. The customers in the restaurant thought that everything had been settled, but now they saw the blood-red wolf that suddenly broke free and pounced on the restaurant with its mouth wide open. Its ferocious teeth could be clearly seen through the transparent floor-to-ceiling window. Their faces changed dramatically, and some timid customers screamed, completely stunned. Oh, no! Sargeras's face also changed, and he tried to catch up with the wolf with his folding chair. He didn't expect that this werewolf could enter a more advanced state of madness, and increase his strength to the extreme in a short time. He was much faster than him, and he was afraid that he wouldn't be able to stop him. Watch out! Sally also let loose a faint cry of surprise. She picked up Amy with one hand and wrapped her other arm around Yabemia's waist as she leaped off to the side. Even she wasn't confident that she would be able to withstand an attack from the giant crimson wolf in its berserk state. The 6 blood-red wolves attacked the restaurant and the surrounding onlookers at the same time. The smell of blood wafted through the air, bringing with it a sense of despair. Most of the people present were ordinary people, or people who were far weaker than these wolves, so they didn't even have a chance to escape. Screams erupted from the chaotic crowd, and the terrified crowd tried to run away, even though they knew that they couldn't outrun the several-meter-long red wolves. The scene instantly descended into chaos. Weak races should be eliminated and become food, the blood-red wolf said cruelly. What a bunch of stubborn bastards. Meg sighed, and turned to look at Julian, who was standing in front of the magic potion shop not far away. It seemed that he had to do something in the end. The people in the restaurant could already see each and every one of the blood-red wolves that were pouncing toward the floor-to-ceiling window. They were all waiting for death in despair. The word chaos in Chaos City doesn't mean that. Right at this moment, A deep voice sounded like a clap of thunder in everyone's ears. A tall and thin figure lifted the curtain of a black horse-drawn carriage and extended a hand toward the restaurant's entrance. Bang! The blood-red wolf, which was transformed by Anthem, seemed to have hit an air wall. Its sharp claws and huge body with terrifying speed and power crashed into the air wall and stopped less than 10 centimeters away from the floor-to-ceiling window. It looked like there was nothing there, but it seemed to be an unshakable iron mountain. Its head and body were directly pressed together by the strong inertia. Its blood-red eyes were wide open, and it looked at the frightened customers in the restaurant unwillingly. If it stretched out its claws again, these cowards would all be dead. Bang! 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 Another 5 dull sounds sounded in succession. An air wall appeared in front of each wolf out of thin air. The wolves crashed into it fiercely, but none of them could shake it, let alone cause any harm to others. I'm Novan. It's okay, you're all safe. Novan, who was standing on the horse-drawn carriage, raised his hand gently as he spoke in a warm voice. The people who had fallen to the ground in their panic seemed to have been picked up by a pair of invisible hands, and the people who were about to collide with one another were gently separated. Everyone was safely separated, and not a single person was injured. The crowd was still in shock, but when they heard the voice, they all looked toward the black horse-drawn carriage. After seeing Novan standing on the carriage, someone exclaimed in surprise, "It's Principal. It's Principal Novan. Principal. It's really Principal Novan." Everyone was relieved to hear that, and they all looked at Novan with surprise and joy on their faces. At the same time, they were also relieved that they had survived the ordeal. However, after seeing Novan, they didn't feel any panic at all. "Principal is here, then we're safe." There was a burst of cheers in the restaurant. Everyone looked at the werewolf whose face was pressed against the floor-to-ceiling window, and their fear disappeared instantly. Who was Novan? The principal of Chaos School. He was also the principal of Chaos City. In Chaos City, he was a man who could stand shoulder to shoulder with the Lord of the Grey Temple and the City Lord. In the eyes of most people, this principal, who had built Chaos School single-handedly, was even more revered and respected in their hearts. He was a 10th-tier magic caster, a gentle educator, the architect of equal order, and the guardian of Chaos City, Novan. Now that he was here, everything was fine. Take these fellows who have violated the laws of Chaos City back to the Grey Temple, and punish them according to the law, Novan said to Brandy. Novan looked at Brandley as he made a grabbing motion, and the 6 giant crimson wolves that seemed to have been bound by a pair of invisible hands were forced back into their human forms. The blooded werewolves were thrown in front of the inspectors, who had just arrived. They were all on the verge of death, and couldn't move at all. Translator, Henyi Translations Editor, Henyi Translations Ho Ho. Anthem lay on the ground, looking unwillingly at 1111 who was lying at the entrance of the restaurant. Just a little bit more. Just a little bit more. The curse on the werewolves could be completely lifted. That damn chef, take them back to Bastille prison. Brandy cast a spell himself, and bound the werewolves with magic ropes, and ordered the inspectors to take them away. I'm here to eat. I heard there's a good restaurant here. Novan disembarked from the horse-drawn carriage with a smile on his face as he listened to everyone's cheers. On the long street, the sand and gravel began to tremble before converging toward the craters on the ground. In the blink of an eye, the ground outside the restaurant had become flat and clean, as if nothing had happened at all. Chapter 296. The werewolf was suddenly subdued by a pair of invisible hands. The crowd erupted into cheers. The ground was restored in the blink of an eye. The situation had changed so quickly that even Meg, who was still waiting for Julian to make his move, was still in a daze. The giant crimson wolf closest to him had its claws less than half a meter away from his head. The smell of blood assailed his nostrils, but it crashed into an air wall that suddenly appeared, and was pinned to the wall. It was like a chick caught by an eagle, it couldn't even struggle. Meg didn't feel much fear. After all, he had fused with Meg Alex's memories. This werewolf was no different from an ordinary puppy. However, he didn't feel any subjective fear. Objectively speaking, this werewolf was still a great threat to him. Even if he had a cleaver in his hand, he most likely wouldn't be able to defeat it, so he didn't let his guard down. The strength of a 10th level Space Grand Magus is indeed extraordinary. Meg looked at the man who had controlled the situation with a wave of his hand, and calmed everyone down just by saying his name. In Chaos City, perhaps only the principal of Chaos School could do that. Meg was naturally happy to see this happen. After all, it wasn't a good thing for the restaurant's image to have this kind of thing happen at the restaurant's entrance. It would be even worse if it left a psychological scar on the customers. The corners of Mag's mouth curled up slightly when he saw Krasu and Mag alighting from the same horse-drawn carriage. Although it was more likely that his identity would be exposed if he came into direct contact with such a big shot, if he could establish a different image in the hearts of these big shots, they might become his greatest protection when someone suspected him in the future. No one would have thought that Meg Alex, who had shocked the world with his sword, would become a chef who could cook all kinds of delicacies, a designer who could invent the steam engine and push the entire continent into the Industrial Revolution, and a genius mathematician who popularized the decimal system. In fact, Meg already had a blueprint in his mind. Since it was inevitable to become famous, then this time, he would use another way to let the world know him as Meg, and not as the Dragon Slayer Knight Alex. As for the recovery of his combat power, that was his greatest trump card. Before he could be sure that he could protect Amy from anyone, keeping a low profile was the best way to survive. Of course, if someone touched his bottom line, Meg felt that it would not be difficult to kill them. Sargeras, who was holding a folding chair with one hand, stared at the werewolves who had been shrunk back to their original forms. His mouth was wide open. If Krasu's fireball spell that repelled the giant dragon outside of Rodu was a display of strength, then Novan's ability to dispel the berserk state of the werewolf, who had broken through to the 8th tier, with a simple wave of his hand, made them feel an unknown sense of awe and fear. Boss, Keel, Mond, and the others were still in a daze. They didn't know why those crazy fellows suddenly became crippled. Flames rose from their bodies as they looked at Sargeras in confusion. Withdraw, withdraw. The battle is over. Sargeras was the first to come to his senses. He withdrew the flames on his body, and hid the folding chair behind his back at the same time. An honest and harmless smile appeared on his face. It was hard to imagine that he had just slapped a 7th-tier werewolf with a folding chair and sent him into a berserk state. Yes. The lava demons also retracted the flames on their bodies upon hearing that, and stood behind Sargeras. Although they didn't know what had just happened, they knew that the old man who had walked out from behind the crowd was definitely not a simple person to be able to cripple all those crazy fellows in an instant. At the entrance of the blacksmith's shop, Sally placed Amy and Yarbemia on the ground. Her first reaction was to get Amy and Yarbemia out of danger, but she didn't expect the situation to be under control so quickly. Principal Novan, the Master of Space, and the #1 spatial magic caster on the Norland continent. Sally looked at Novan with awe and veneration in her eyes. There weren't many 10th-tier great magic casters on the Norland continent, but there were at least a few in each race. Perhaps there weren't many who were renowned across the entire continent. Aside from Crassus, the Lord of Ice, and Julian, the Lord of Ice, the Master of Space, Novan was widely acknowledged as the #1 spatial magic caster. Sally had grown up listening to legends about them. She didn't expect to see not only Crassus and Julian, but also Novan after coming to Chaos City. For a magic caster, it was like seeing her idols, so she was naturally very excited. Yes, this is the one. Crassus made his way over to Amy's with a smile. Principal, these people? Brandley asked as he pointed at 1111 and Lulu, who were still lying on the ground, as well as Sargeras and the others, who were all looking up at the sky at a 45-degree angle, as if they hadn't done anything wrong. According to the rules, even if they hadn't done anything wrong, they still had to be brought back to understand the situation. Treat the injured first, then do the rest according to your rules. A hint of surprise appeared on Novan's face as he looked at 1111, who was lying on the ground, and the wooden tube in his hand froze slightly on her lower abdomen. Yes. Brandley nodded before leading Bob forward. He wasn't proficient in healing magic, and with Bob's powers, he could only do some simple treatment. They're under my protection. Right at this moment, a hoarse voice sounded from behind the crowd, and a path of ice and frost that was around 1/2 meter wide appeared beneath Julian's feet, extending toward the entrance of the restaurant. 1111 and Lulu were both enshrouded within it, and the passers-by hurriedly stepped aside to make way for them. The snowy white frost instantly froze the blood on the ground, and at the same time, sealed their wounds. However, they weren't completely frozen solid. Both of them had lost too much blood, and were on the verge of fainting. Tears welled up in their eyes as they looked at one another from afar. "What's going on?" Brandley's footsteps faltered upon seeing this. He looked at the hunchbacked Julian, and a slight headache welled up in his heart. "They're under my protection." Crassus also pointed at Sargeras and the others with a smile, and said, "I really admire those guys who know how to protect my disciples." Beza, who was leading the group toward Sargeras and the others, also stopped in his tracks. He had witnessed the entire process with his own eyes, and he was also very appreciative of Sargeras and the others. If it weren't for them, Principal Novan most likely wouldn't have been able to take control of the situation. The outside of the restaurant instantly fell silent. The situation was completely under control, but things didn't seem to be going very smoothly. "Master Halfbeard, Master Turtle, can you save Big Sister 1111 and Big Bear first?" Chapter 297. What a powerful spatial magic wave. Is that person the legendary space manipulator? Elizabeth looked at Novan with awe in her eyes as she stood on the branch of a big tree at the side. The frost dragon's frost domain was also a type of spatial magic, so she was very sensitive to spatial magic fluctuations. The spell that Novan had just casually displayed had already far exceeded her knowledge. In fact, she felt that even her father might not have been able to reach such heights at his peak. Elizabeth looked to the side, and her eyes immediately settled on Yarbemia. Her eyes lit up at the sight of the dragon horns on her head, and she couldn't help but let loose a soft cry of surprise. Draconians weren't very common on the Norland continent. In contrast, giant dragons with lifespans of over 1,000 years rarely chose humans who had short lifespans as partners. Furthermore, due to the fragility of the human body, Draconians couldn't transform into dragons even if they had half of the dragon bloodline in their bodies. Draconians with dragon horns were the most common type of Draconians. Aside from that, they were no different from normal humans, and would never be able to transform into true giant dragons. In the past, Elizabeth wouldn't have been interested in a Draconian. The proud dragons never acknowledged that Draconians belonged to the dragon race. However, after seeing the things that her father had left behind, Elizabeth's thoughts changed slightly. In any case, that little girl had the same bloodline as her, so she could be considered her half-sister. In fact, she had never even met her father after she was born. Father said that she was 14 years old in the letter. The letter was written 3 years ago, so she should be around 17 years old now. She seems to be quite close in age. Elizabeth fell into deep thought as she looked at Yarbemia. "Please." Amy ran over from the blacksmith's shop. She looked at the deathly pale 1111, then at Crassus and Julian, and her little face was filled with concern and urgency. "Little Amy, I don't know any healing magic." Crassus looked at Amy with an apologetic expression. "Right now, I can only stop the bleeding from their wounds and go back to concoct healing potions for them." Julian looked at the 2 men on the ground, and waved at Sargeras and the others. "Carry them to my shop." Novan looked at Amy with admiration. This was the first time he had seen this precious disciple whom Crassus had described as extremely talented. She was indeed very intelligent and full of love. "Okay," Sargeras hurriedly replied as he picked up Lulu, who was as stiff as ice, and walked over. 1111, let me carry her." When Yarbemia saw the 2 lava demons walking toward 1111, he quickly stepped forward and bent down to carry 1111 gently. He then followed Julian to the magic potion shop. "Boss, I'll go and help." Sally looked at Yarbemia's receding figure, and clenched her fists as if she had made up her mind. She said goodbye to Meg, and followed him into the magic potion shop. "Father, I want to go and see Big Sister 1111 and the others." Amy turned to Meg with a concerned expression. "Go ahead. You were very brave today, and you did very well, Meg praised as he stroked Amy's hair with a smile. Millimeter. A smile appeared on Amy's face as she jogged toward the magic potion shop. An ugly duckling hopped along behind her. Take those guys back first. We'll interrogate them after they've stabilized. The 6 lava demons did a good job, so there's no need to interrogate them. The 2 injured beings and the lava demons were all taken away by Urian. Brandley listened to Basil's brief account of what had happened, and as someone who often dealt with the affairs of the Grey Temple, he was naturally able to come up with a solution very quickly. Lulu and 1111 definitely had something to do with this incident, but they were the ones who were forced to retaliate. Furthermore, they took the initiative to attack in order not to implicate others. Apart from the fact that they had to bear some responsibility for destroying the building, they weren't at fault. Now that they were severely injured, and Julian had personally said that he would protect them, the Grey Temple couldn't be too embarrassed. Thus, he had no choice but to let the matter rest for now. Sorry for the fright. If you don't mind, please come in. Meg looked at the customers outside the restaurant with a smile. He was also a little worried about the injuries of the druids, but after what had happened today, it was very important for him to appease the customers. Of course we're going to eat. Mr. Mac, give me a braised chicken and rice and a sweet tofu pudding. Crassus led the way into the restaurant. I'm just here to eat. Novan also smiled as he took a glance at Meg. This restaurant owner looks very young, but he's very brave. He didn't even bat an eyelid when the giant wolf was about to pounce on him. Meg also looked directly into Novan's eyes with a smile. To Meg Alex, Novan was a worthy opponent. As for Meg, he had transmigrated from the modern world, so he had a lot of respect for the principal, but not much respect for him, so his expression was very calm. Where have I seen this pair of eyes before? As they passed by each other, a series of names suddenly flashed through Novan's mind, but he dismissed them all in the end. Perhaps all interesting young people had similar eyes. Just like that young man who claimed that he could slice open his spatial domain with a single sword strike. What a pity. Meg looked in the direction of the magic potion shop, then turned and walked into the restaurant. It seemed that he had to take care of the restaurant himself for the time being. The only damage to the restaurant from the previous battle was the door, which had been pierced by an arrow at the beginning, and then sent flying by Lulu's slap. Some spilled food and spoons fell to the ground, which were all caused by the panicked customers. Overall, the damage was still acceptable. Hello, Principal. Principal Novan also came to eat at Mammis. Looks like Mammis is becoming more and more famous. All of the customers greeted Novan respectfully when they saw him. With Novan around, they felt much more at ease and returned to their seats. Holy fuck. I lost a piece of meat in my Ruggiamo. My heart hurts. How much is this spoon? We don't have to pay for the damage caused by an accident like this, right? Of course, if you can have another sweet tofu pudding, I'd be more than willing to pay for it. Chapter 298. All of a sudden, the restaurant was filled with grief. They had been enjoying the delicious food, but something so thrilling had suddenly happened. Although it was a close call in the end, it was still unforgettable that the food had been spilled. I can only provide one helping of tofu pudding, but I'll pay for the broken cutlery. If you want to talk about miserable, isn't your front door still in good condition? Meg stood in the middle of the restaurant and pointed at the empty front door helplessly. What happened today was really unexpected. The customers all burst into laughter upon hearing that. That's right, Mr. Mac didn't do anything to offend anyone, and the restaurant's front door was smashed away. Furthermore, Boss Mag and little Amy had fearlessly stood at the entrance of the restaurant to protect the young woman in the white dress, and everyone was quite touched by their actions. Not everyone would stand up for a customer who had only been to the restaurant twice, let alone in a dangerous situation like this. All right, since Mr. Mac has said so, I'll have another Ruggiamo to calm myself down. My braised chicken soup spilled. I'll have another braised chicken rice. My head can be broken, and my blood can flow. I can tell you two aren't true love. I hid under the table and didn't spill a single drop of tofu pudding. But I still have another helping of Yeongju fried rice. The customers who had calmed down because of Novan's appearance relaxed again because of Meg's words. Anything could happen in Chaos City. After all, the battle between the two 10th-tier magic casters, Crassus and Julian, had attracted a lot of attention, so not many people would be so pretentious as to want to go home after a scare. All right, please wait a moment. Meg took down the customers' orders one by one, and walked over to Novan and Crassus, who had just sat down at a table. He smiled, and asked, "What would you like to order? The restaurant is very unique. Seems like you've been to many places." Novan wasn't in a hurry to place his order. He looked around the restaurant before looking into Meg's eyes with a smile, as if he were trying to glean something from Meg's body. After spending a lot of money, it's natural that it would be more unique. That artist claimed that he had traveled around the continent and knew everything. However, it was obvious that he was bragging. In the eyes of an expert, he would be a laughingstock. Meg's expression was natural as he smiled. He was not flustered at all by this level of probing. "Host, please watch your words. This system never brags." The system's angry voice rang out. Crassus shook his head. "Then you've wronged him. These places are pretty much the same. It's just that the drawing of the Mage Tower is a little ugly." Novan nodded, and commented, "Chaos City is indeed very well drawn, but it lacks some artistic conception. If everything is drawn, it would be no different from drawing nothing at all. This is ingenious work, but it can't be considered superb." "See, I didn't say that," Meg thought to himself, and he was struck by the urge to laugh. He designed this Magus Tower, so how can he blame me for drawing something that's ugly when he designed it himself? This is basically a one-to-one conversion of the real thing. This Chaos City drawing is a scaled version of a satellite map. Aside from the fact that there are no labels, you can just use it as a map. Do you have to talk about artistic conception with a map? The system's indignant voice sounded as if it wanted nothing more than to jump out in protest. Meg merely smiled and didn't say anything. For some reason, he was quite pleased to hear the system's exasperated voice. Novan withdrew his gaze from Meg. It appeared that he was overthinking things. He flipped open the menu, and was slightly surprised to see the prices on it. However, he didn't show it on his face. After looking at the menu for a while, he closed it, and said, "I'll have a braised chicken and rice and a savory tofu pudding." "All right, please wait a moment." Meg nodded with a smile before walking toward the kitchen. He heaved an internal sigh of relief. As long as he could get past Novan, there would be no problems in Chaos City. Furthermore, if he wanted to invent something like a steam engine in the future, he would have to come into contact with him. Even though the vice principal of the Hyder Institute was an expert in this field, he was still not qualified to make any demands. "This young man is quite interesting," Novan said with a smile as he looked at Meg's back. "He is indeed very interesting. I feel like he can change this world." Crassus also nodded with a smile. He paused momentarily before continuing. "When it comes to the definition of delicacies and cooking methods, he's a genius. Changing the world is not an easy task." Novan shook his head. "Novan, you used to boast like that in front of me many times." Crassus pursed his lips. "Because I boasted, I've been doing it my entire life. However, it looks like Chaos City won't be able to reach the state I want it to be before I'm lying in my coffin." Novan shook his head with a smile. He was a little proud, but also a little dejected. "What you've done has already changed the world. 100 years ago, no one would have believed that a city where all races could coexist peacefully would appear on the Norland continent. No one would have thought that all races would receive equal education from a young age. However, all of this has happened in Chaos City, in Chaos School." The smile on Crassus' face faded, and he nodded with a serious expression as he said, "You've already done more than enough to change the world. It's not the same as the two of us doing small things. I didn't really believe that he could change the world, but now, I feel like I can look forward to it. An elf and a demon eating at the same table must have a special charm to it. It's more efficient than what I've been cooking for the past few decades, so it's worth looking forward to." Novan's gaze fell on the elf and demon sitting across from each other at the table with a hint of surprise and anticipation on his face. "Master Turtle, are they going to recover?" Amy followed him into the magic potion shop, and looked at 1111 and Lulu, who were lying side by side on the shelves, with a concerned look on her face. Don't worry, they won't die. However, they won't be able to recover that quickly, either. Julian walked toward the shelves filled with magic potions of different colors with his hands clasped behind his back, and said in a hoarse voice, "Those big guys, you can leave now. It's too hot." "All right." Sargeras hurriedly nodded, and led the lava demons out of the room. Lulu turned to look at 1111 with difficulty. She slowly placed her fingers on the counter, and gently grasped 1111's hand as a doting smile appeared on her face. 1111's face was deathly pale, and she was on the verge of passing out. However, after Lulu grasped her hand, she seemed to have breathed a sigh of relief, and a smile also appeared on her face. "It's great that you're still here after surviving a disaster." Chapter 299. Let's give it a try. Julian replied without even turning his head. He held a long-necked crystal vial in his hand, and added all kinds of magic potions into it before gently shaking it. "Big sister Aisha, you can do it." Amy looked at Sally with anticipation in her eyes. Then, she stood on her tiptoes and comforted 1111 and Lulu. "Big sister 1111, Big Bear, don't worry. Big sister Aisha and my master turtle shell are both super powerful. They'll definitely make you two better. You have to get better. This kind of love is so touching." Yabemia stood off to the side with an anxious expression on her face as she looked at the two of them with their fingers intertwined. "Save her first," Lulu stuttered in a hoarse voice. She looked at Sally, who was standing beside the counter, with a hint of complex emotions in her eyes. "All right." Sally nodded, and a chopstick appeared between her fingers. A flash of green light appeared, and the chopstick transformed into a small green bamboo at a speed that was discernible to the naked eye. "Huh!" Julian stopped what he was doing, and looked back at the green bamboo in Sally's hand with a hint of surprise. Dense life force energy was emanating from the small bamboo, and he looked up at Sally. His eyes narrowed slightly, and he thought to himself, "I didn't think that she would be able to use life magic. Looks like she's quite an important figure in the elven race. Life magic of this level is indeed much more effective than magic potions. I underestimated her. However, will there be any adverse reactions between nature magic and life magic?" 1111 struggled to open her eyes, and she looked at the green bamboo in Sally's hand with a hint of surprise and nervousness in her eyes. The aura of life magic was very familiar to her, but it was also completely different from nature magic. It was as if a tree with the same root had suddenly split into two branches, and it had grown in two different environments, thereby taking on two completely different forms. "Almighty Tree of Life, please grant me the power of life to cleanse all impurities." Sally murmured a spell in a low voice, and gently touched the wound on 1111's lower abdomen with her right hand that was holding the green bamboo. A pale green light slowly shrouded her lower abdomen. The layer of frost that had stopped the bleeding shattered and dissipated. The wound that almost ran across her lower abdomen was still stained with black and red filth. Fresh blood was about to flow out again. That was the venom on the werewolf's claws. It was also the reason why the wound could not stop bleeding. "Ah!" 1111's eyebrows furrowed, and she let out a cry of pain. Her body subconsciously wanted to curl up into a ball, and her forehead a cold sweat instantly. Lulu held 1111's hand, and his eyes were filled with tenderness and worry. 1111 also looked into Lulu's eyes, and the pain seemed to have lessened by half. Sally's other hand gently brushed over the wound, and a stream of blue water appeared and washed over the wound. The blackish-red dirt was immediately washed away by the water, as if it had met its nemesis. The wound returned to its normal color, and the blood stopped flowing out under Sally's control. Phew! 1111 let out a sigh of relief. The stabbing pain from the wound was immediately reduced. The water flowing over the wound was cool and comfortable, as if a pair of nimble little hands were gently caressing it. Huh! There seems to be something in her body that is automatically healing the wound. Although it's very slow, the effect is somewhat similar to life magic. Sally was just about to touch 1111's wound with her little bamboo, when she saw a touch of green light appear on the wound. She couldn't help but be surprised. She had seen this light when she was fighting before, and it was a magic wave that was very compatible with nature. Maybe it's a natural ability of self-healing. Sally didn't think too much about it. She touched the wound with her little bamboo, and the green light was continuously injected into the wound. The wound, which was so deep that her internal organs could almost be seen, began to heal automatically. This process lasted for about 3 minutes. The tender green bamboo turned into a withered one, and then turned into a pile of ash in Sally's hand, which drifted to the ground. The tender green light enveloped 1111's body. The wound had completely healed, and there was only a faint layer of scab on the surface. She had absorbed all the vitality brought by the life magic, and her pale face regained some color. It seemed that the wound was no longer a problem. Sally was also relieved. 1111's wound was different from the small one on Meg's hand. She rarely used life magic to save people, but from the looks of it, it seemed to be working well. As long as she absorbed the remaining life energy, her life wouldn't be in danger. Sally took out a second chopstick from somewhere, and prepared to save Lulu. At this moment, a withered sapling suddenly emerged from 1111's lower abdomen. The green leaf at the top of the sapling withered again, leaving only a hint of green on the tip. Then, the sapling started to absorb the life energy on the surface of 1111's body crazily. It finished absorbing all the life energy in the blink of an eye, and disappeared into 1111's lower abdomen again. What's this? Sally was a little stunned. The sapling had only appeared and disappeared for less than 3 seconds, but she had clearly seen how it absorbed the life energy. However, after the sapling disappeared into 1111's body again, her breathing seemed to have calmed down. Apart from feeling a little weak, she should be fine. Julian withdrew his gaze from 1111's lower abdomen, and sighed in his heart. It really is the world tree, but it looks like it's about to wither. It seems like it's going to be difficult for the druids to regain their former glory. Sister Aisha is so powerful, Amy said softly with her eyes wide open. Please, I beg you to save him. 1111 was still too weak to get up. She turned to Sally and begged. She held Lulu's big hand gently with her little hand, and her eyes were full of concern. All right. Sally nodded. Although she was a little confused by what had just happened, she still started to save Lulu immediately. Compared to 1111, Lulu's injuries were even more shocking. Almost no part of his body was intact. The blue water washed over his wounds, and a green light enveloped his entire body. The wounds stopped bleeding, and scabs began to form over them. The pained expression on his face slowly faded, and his breathing gradually calmed down. He glanced at 1111, and his head tilted to the side as he fainted. Sally let go of the bamboo that had already turned into ashes, and said to 1111, whose face was full of concern, "The wounds have stopped bleeding. They won't tear open if he doesn't move too much. However, his injuries are too serious, and he has lost too much blood. He needs to rest for a while, so he's asleep now." Thank you so much." 1111 forced herself to sit up, and said gratefully to everyone, "I'm glad you're all fine." A happy smile appeared on Yabemia's face. Suddenly, her eyes widened, and she turned to run out of the door as she yelled, "I have to go back to work. Boss must be very busy by himself. I have to go back to work too." Sally panicked. There were so many customers in the restaurant, and Meg couldn't handle everything by himself. You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.